Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Right, belt yourself in because I'm not quite sure where we're going at the moment. It's a very, very odd one. You'll be aware if you are kind stroke, mad stroke, bored enough to listen to this programme on a regular basis, you'll be aware that I don't have enormous faith in my news values. It gets better with every passing year, but British newspapers over the last 20 or 30 years haven't really been in the business of keeping their readers informed. They've been in the business of titillating, haven't they, and sort of discombobulating and commoditising anger and fear or pushing people towards points of no return. And, the business model is pretty clear to see. And the tragedy of the last 10 years is that what used to be confined to the cheaper prints, to the Sun or the Mail and the late edition Express, later era Express has now seeped into the Telegraph and increasingly, it's very sad to say, into the Times since their newest editor was appointed. So you don't have to feel bad about not being able to fully define what is an important or big story and what is not. For example, the story this morning, the horrible story about the submarine that is lost on a visit to the Titanic, and I'm afraid I can resist it, but I understand completely why it's journalistically irresistible to focus in on things like the depleting air supplies and the horror of that situation. I mean, in the great scheme of what is important in the world today, that would barely register unless you were on the flipping thing or loved someone aboard. And yet you completely see why that's a huge story, because it just fascinates us in almost primal ways. So that's a good example, actually. And if there are any developments on that story, we will, of course, bring them to you. It just leaves me feeling sad and frightened, actually. It's just horrible, isn't it, in every imaginable way. But other stuff, you know and I know, that when 354 MPs vote to deprive a former Prime Minister of a pass with which he can visit the House of Commons, a former Prime Minister, I mean, it was a big deal when they did it to John Bercow, a former Speaker, but a former Prime Minister, 354 MPs vote to deprive a former Prime Minister of a parliamentary pass. They vote also to endorse the 90-day suspension from the House of Commons that was handed down to him by the Privileges Committee. It followed a debate during which his pathetic defenders, and bizarrely, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to be asking you whether the pathetic defenders of Boris Johnson yesterday are actually the second worst contributors to this unfolding tragedy, as opposed to the worst, because there's something close to courageous, is there? Not quite the right word, about turning up to defend the guy rather than hiding in a fridge or wherever it was that countless Tories, not countless, we'll get the number shortly, but many, many, many Tories elected to, I don't know, what were they doing? Sitting at a bus stop wearing a Groucho Marx disguise or borrowing Michael Fabricant's wigs so that they could all pretend they weren't really. There was 48 Michael Fabricants sitting in the canteen when everybody else was voting. I don't know. Michael Fabricant, I think, was on a plane, actually, because someone took a photograph of him. And although it was from behind, he is fairly easily identifiable, isn't he? So 354 MPs vote to deprive a former Prime Minister of a parliamentary pass. It means if he wants to visit the House of Commons, he'll have to queue up like the rest of us and empty his pockets, go through airport security, and quite possibly be frisked. And the 90-day suspension. It followed a debate, forgive me, I got distracted, during which all of the pathetic attempts to defend him were summarily and completely dismantled by, guess what? I mean, what has done for Johnson and his fans at every turn? What has done or will do and is doing for Brexit, the project which defines him like no other? What is it that finally undoes him? What have I been saying to you for probably 10 years now, certainly 7? There is truth and there is untruth. If you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. Boris Johnson, an irredeemably awful politician, a preternaturally dishonest human being, a serial and pathological liar who pollutes everything and everybody that comes into contact with him, up to and including our parliamentary democracy and our country. That's not an opinion anymore. That's just counting. 354 MPs yesterday finding the gumption to endorse that unavoidable, although long overdue conclusion. Incredible, really, when you think about it. And the 90-day suspension for contempt of Parliament, a contempt compounded by his response to the original Privileges Committee report. Whether or not Jacob Rees-Mogg is too stupid to understand how ridiculous he looks when he seeks to defend this man, or whether his ridiculousness is now so baked in that it's as much a part of him as the ludicrous confected accent, I do not know. I'll never know. And frankly, I think we might finally be approaching a period of British political history where we don't actually have to care anymore. The contributions of these divots are finally returning to the redundancy from which they should never have been elevated. Andrea Jenkins, Donald Trump's biggest British fan last time I checked, although whether she stepped back from that position I did neither know nor care, but she was waving her pathetic little polyester flag for Boris Johnson yesterday despite the absolutely incontrovertible evidence. Incontrovertible evidence. Rees-Mogg didn't even vote yesterday after that. Well, let's just call it an intervention, shall we? 9 minutes after 10 is the time. Rishi Sunak didn't turn up. I suggested to you he would be in Ukraine. It was tongue-in-cheek, but only 52% tongue-in-cheek. 48% tongue-in-cheek, 52% wherever your tongue sits the rest of the time when it's not in your cheek. In the case of much of the journalists, many of the journalists who've been... No, I won't go there. No, you're quite right. I think I'll leave that picture to paint itself in your minds. But the Prime Minister didn't even turn up. His justification for it just didn't make any sense at all. But it occurred to me, watching some of the debate and listening to some of the defences yesterday, it occurred to me that none of it has made sense for a long time now. They just say words. They don't mean anything. Can we get the Sunak stuff from yesterday, the bit where he sought to explain, or from today, just Sunak talking about why he wouldn't be there. Some of the other people that stood up in the House of Commons yesterday, Nicholas Fletcher, I hadn't come across before. You're already nominating the worst people. I wasn't going to do this as a topic, but seeing as you've already started, who am I to stand in your way? Nadine Dorries, Andrea Jenkins, is it Nia Lockie? Is that how you pronounce it? Nicholas Fletcher, Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, who are the worst contributors to this national pageant? I do not know. But I do know this. An astonishing number of Tory MPs failed to turn up. They failed to turn up. A decent number did. And I know it's not a lot to ask of a parliamentarian, but given the choice, some took the right one. Sangeeta conducted an astonishing interview with Tobias Ellwood at the weekend. I don't know if you heard it. It was one of the most powerful bits of political radio I've ever had the privilege of experiencing. And it was essentially a very senior Conservative, albeit one who's never been particularly sympathetic or bamboozled, shall we say, by Boris Johnson, Tobias Ellwood, planning to abstain at the outset when he appeared on the programme, and then returning to be told by Sangeeta that callers to LBC had been making their feelings pretty clear. Callers had been offering up their views, particularly on the issue of abstaining. And as a consequence of that exchange, Tobias Ellwood moved from intending to abstain to intending to vote in support of the Privileges Committee report. Now, listen, I know all politicians are awful and all of that rhetoric. I know how intoxicating it can be. It's not true. There are decent people in Parliament and there are decent people in all parties. You just have to dig a little deeper in some of them than you do in others. And I know that Ellwood will be conscious of his constituency and his constituents, but still, that was really... I read this book once, and the first line of it was, there's no point having a mind if you never change it. And I thought Tobias Ellwood, after his exchange with did I say read? I meant wrote. Tobias Ellwood, with his exchange with Sangeeta the other day, I thought that was a really beautiful and very rare example of it. And yet, so many of them still abstained. I'm conscious of a stuck record on the... No, not that one. No, not that one either. No, nor that one. I'm conscious of a new stuck record on the programme at the moment. And it's my concern for people who've been abandoned by their political heroes. And while you might not realise you've been abandoned, I genuinely feel, especially if you were heavily invested and engaged in this, the idea that Boris Johnson was a winner and that he had your interests at heart. And if you were solely signed up because it upset people like Sadiq Khan, that's fine. I mean, we can speculate about what your motivations are, but I'm not talking to you now. I will continue to feed your masochistic streak every morning with facts and evidence and vindication, but I'm not talking to you right now. I'm talking to people like Rohit in Redbridge, who says, as a Conservative voter, I think every abstainer or non-attendee should be handed their P45 and shown the door. Let the by-election ensue. I don't generally agree with you, James. However, on this one, I do. That's who I'm concerned about most. There's no fun in being proved right about this stuff because it's our country. If you care about the country, then you do not derive any pleasure whatsoever from seeing predictions of damage come true. But people who thought that they would be on the sunlit uplands by now, people who thought that Boris Johnson was somehow trustworthy, people who thought that, I'll leave Brexit out of it because I do understand that that's possibly too big a obstacle to get over yet. But Leah Nicky was the one I was thinking about. Richard has reminded me. I didn't see Andrew Bridgen's contribution, but Russell has christened him the dork of the debate. I think that kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? Unless John Redwood stands up. But the people who didn't turn up, let's think about that for a minute. A huge proportion of them will have been people claiming not long ago to care about parliamentary sovereignty. In many ways, I think that abstaining or being absent yesterday, I think that's impinging parliamentary sovereignty. Certainly not endorsing the report impugns parliamentary sovereignty. They also claimed that they wanted to take back control, and yet when they were given an opportunity to do so, they elected to twiddle their thumbs. They have absolutely no case to stand on, no legs to stand on when it comes to defending Johnson. The people who tried to do it did that. Chiefly, I think, that Leah Nicky woman and that Jacob Rees-Mogg chap. I think they proved most conclusively that trying to defend him was a absolutely ludicrous project. And then the decision not to turn up at all. Should we do the why and the what this morning? So I don't know whether you know what your own MP did. Chances are, if it's a Tory, they bottled it. There's a chance that they actually voted against the bill, which would make them... I read it this morning, and there's only 7 of them. Desmond Swain came in as a late arrival, so we'll run through those names. But the ones that didn't turn up, the why and the what of it. Why didn't they turn up? 0345 6060 973. Seriously, I don't think that's a rhetorical question. I think there'll be different answers to it. If you're listening, lads, give us a ring. And ladies, if you are one of the people that bottled it yesterday, tell us why. 0345 6060 973. I heard one of them suggesting that they thought the 90-day suspension was too stringent. And I found myself thinking it was a theoretical suspension, mate. Your man's already run away. Brave Sir Boris. Ran away. He's already run away. Oh, I don't think the 90-day suspension is fair. You realise he's not going to have to take that. Yes, but I didn't want to vote for it because it wouldn't have been fair. Okay, so you are impugning parliamentary sovereignty or impugning the findings of the committee. Rishi Sunak ran away. He was absent for the debate along with other senior cabinet ministers. He said he was busy meeting the Swedish Prime Minister before a dinner in the evening. That's just not true. By the way, I don't need parliamentary privilege to call that a lie. That's a blatant lie. If he wanted to vote in that debate, he could have done with it. I'll tell you what, make a list of people that you think might understand the importance of casting a vote in a parliament, and I suspect that a foreign prime minister would be fairly near the top of it. What's that you say, Mr. Sunak? You need to pop next door? You need to pop over the road and cast a vote? Well, absolutely, of course. No problem at all. I will stay here and play Jenga. The idea that he couldn't go and vote is a blatant lie. Utter cowardice, actually. That's the angriest I felt this morning. I'm pretty chill otherwise, but the Prime Minister, we discussed this yesterday, utter cowardice. And Nishi, I'm told it's pronounced. My apologies. Thank you, Dean. Didn't turn up. Astonishing, really. Absolutely astonishing. Why didn't they turn up? 0345 6060 973. Either your MP or your Prime Minister or the whole pathetic A lot of them. Why? Why didn't they turn up? What possible calculation would have made it preferable not to turn up? And are they more cowardly than the people who voted to defend Boris Johnson? I am not offering up a single scintilla of support for those clowns, except to say that they might, although they're hideous, be somehow less cowardly than their colleagues who couldn't even be bothered to appear or to vote one way or the other. So there's three categories here, isn't there? There's the people who were there but abstained. That's an action, if you like. That is an act of abstention. There's absenteeism, which is an inaction. I didn't even bother turning up. And then there is opposition, which is again an action. So the strongest, that's probably the right word to use. The strongest action is to vote against. The second strongest action, and indeed the second weakest action, is to abstain. And the weakest action, or the least strong action, is to absent yourself. What do you think of it? What do you think of them? 0345 6060 973. I really mean it, because we've got to start clawing back our democracy now. And the best way to do that is by informed conversation about political issues. We've got to get rid of the football scars. We've got to get rid of the Brexit intoxication. We've got to start everyone has to start at some point doing what we've tried to do for the last few years and focusing upon facts. What on earth was going on in the minds of these people who wanted to take back control and who fetishised parliamentary sovereignty when given an opportunity to do both on a very personal level? They carked it. They bottled it. They ran for the hills. Why did they do that? 0345 6060 973. And what do you think of them? It's 20 past 10. 23 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And the question is today, perhaps unexpectedly, I was going to do one of my coma call-ins, which is what we do when I just want you to pretend that I'd been asleep for 10 years. And I woke up yesterday to find 350-odd MPs voting to condemn a recently resigned Prime Minister. But I'm more interested in the people who didn't turn up. What's that all about? You realise it's 23 minutes after 10, and I could have started the show by saying, look at all these MPs who didn't turn up. What's that all about? 0345 6060 973. Joe's in Torquay. Joe, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James.
Hello, Joe.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit nervous, so
Why?
bear with me.
Why? It's only me.
Because I don't often phone in. So.
Well, no need to be nervous.
Yeah, thank you. I emailed my MP this morning, who is Kevin Foster.
Yeah.
He used to be immigration minister for a period of time, so he is one of those that will not put his head above the parapet. He's just, he just goes with the flow. And his response back to me was basically it's all Labour's fault. He abstained. Because Labour forced through a discussion, it would have just got waved through as normal, but because two Labour party members voted no, it had to go through to be a debate. Or we'll go and vote no. So it had to be debated
I think
the
debate would have happened, but the vote perhaps wouldn't.
Yeah, I got to admit, I was trying to get through it. I was the shock of reading that.
But then that of course, that overlooks the Tories who did vote for it, of course. But he'll be making excuses for himself rather than necessarily reflecting reality. So he didn't vote at all because he thought that the vote in Parliament was somehow the fault of MPs.
Yes. It was effectively forced upon a situation, and it was out of what is normal. I mean, I haven't sent my response back yet, but I'm in the process of doing so.
What you must do, you must say, as I said to 1.46 million people on LBC this morning, that's what you must do when you send your response.
That
might focus his mind somewhat.
Yeah, he did obviously mention around the excessive sanction.
Right.
Which is obviously the response to the only reason that it is an excessive sanction is because Boris Johnson was a petulant child and didn't follow the rules in the first place.
And breached the requirement of privacy that was printed across the top of the page in capital letters. This is really where the media has let us all down, isn't it? Because all of these people, Victoria Derbyshire did a brilliant job last night with Bob Seeley, I think, from the Isle of Wight. But all of these people should have been hit over the head for the last 12 months with evidence of having got it wrong in the past. And on this occasion, him pretending the sanction is too stiff, you think it was acceptable of him then to breach the confidentiality of the report by giving his version of events to newspapers when he knew expressly that he wasn't supposed to, or indeed to...
But he'll get away with it around here, though. I mean,
really?
Because, well, it's there's an older contingent who have been Tory forever. I mean, we're probably one of the only parts in the country that actually ended up with a Tory council.
Yeah, no, Wyre Forest, and where my mum lives as well, up in Wyre Forest, they swung back the other way. So, in your own words, just finally, under your own analysis, I think we can fairly agree that blaming a vote on MPs who exist largely to vote is a little bit ridiculous. Why do you think he bottled it? Why didn't he go through with the other 7 that actually voted against the bill because they thought it was unfair?
Because that's actually staking his colours to one mast or the other.
Yes.
He doesn't want to actually be noticed. He's trying to just make it all go away. And by abstaining, there's no record of him being there. There's no record of him saying yes or no.
I don't think he abstained. I can't quite work out. I've got the list in front of me.
Well, yeah, but did not turn up.
I've got didn't vote. So I think if you were there and you didn't go through the chamber, that would count as an abstention. But if you weren't there, I don't know. But I think not turning up is arguably worse than turning up and trying to defend him. Joe, thank you. I don't know, once again, I have no idea what you were nervous about, although it wasn't a brilliant phone line. My apologies to people listening for that. Not nobody's fault. Margaret's in Catterick in North Yorkshire. Margaret, what's going on? What do you make of all this?
I just think as...
Hang on a minute, that's Rishi Sunak country, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
That's
interesting. Why I'm calling.
Yes.
So I'm a constituent. I am not a Tory member. I have never voted Tory.
Okay.
But I think if our Prime Minister cannot be prepared to stand up and vote for parliamentary sovereignty and process, how can he possibly remain our Prime Minister?
It is remarkable, isn't it, actually? I think you remind us of the seriousness of the situation. Who is the Prime Minister? What is the Prime Minister, if not the point of the pyramid, as it were, the peak of the Parliament? And here he is saying, no, sorry, can't be bothered. Shall I remind you of his defence? Would you like to hear his defence? It's only
please tell me. Please tell me his defence.
I don't need to tell you. I can play it to you. It's only 46 seconds long.
Well, this committee was established under the former Prime Minister. It commanded the confidence of the House at the time, and I'm sure that they've done their work thoroughly, and I respect them for that. Obviously, this is a matter for the House, not for the government, and that's why each and individual colleagues will make up their own mind when the time comes.
So are you not going to be there?
I said each and individual colleague will make up their own mind when the time comes. This is a matter for the House rather than for the government. It's an important distinction, and that's why I wouldn't want to influence anyone in advance of that vote.
But you promised professionalism, accountability, integrity at every level. Boris Johnson has undermined all of those. Do you not need to set an example and vote for him to be punished for that?
As I said, this is a matter for the House. It's not a government matter.
He's a member of the House, isn't he? That's the point you're making, Margaret.
Exactly.
Yes.
He's an independent in inverted commas, obviously he's a Tory,
yes.
But he is an individual, and as an individual, and also as the leader of the country, he should be doing, in his words, what he thinks is right.
Yes, well, he did.
And obviously he thinks it's right not to vote, which means that as far as he's concerned, what actually happens in Parliament, I'm about to quote Fight Club, and I don't know. That's quite.
I don't think we quote Fight. We don't quote Fight Club enough on this programme, Margaret. Do you know, when I heard your voice when you came, I thought to myself, I bet she's quoting Fight Club before we go to the headlines. And here you are, I'm like Nostradamus. Go on, which quote?
What goes on in Parliament stays in Parliament.
It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What do you make of it all? Does someone want to have a go at defending it? You'd be really welcome. I promise you would. 0345 60973. Loyalty to Boris Johnson, the serial liar, is more important than parliamentary sovereignty. It's not quite the rule of law, is it? But certainly the notion of supremacy or sovereignty. I don't know. Is that how you defend? I don't know how you defend it, honestly, but I'd love you to try. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. On the long list of things that we take no pleasure in being proved right about, I think Jacob Rees-Mogg's pretensions to authority fell apart finally last night or yesterday. I mean, not that it matters in the great scheme of things. He'll go happily off into the next stage of his career, probably working either for the Daily Mail or one of those weird new TV stations where scrutiny is banned. But the what's the phrase I'm looking for? The bogus authority. Hugo Rifkin put it best. There was a time that Rees-Mogg, you could have seen him being a sort of ridiculous or eccentric but authoritative figure when his grift was working, when people actually believed that he cared, for example, about parliamentary procedure, or that he had a deep and abiding interest in parliamentary history and in the principles of the mechanisms of Parliament. You remember that? It was not that long ago. And then, of course, Johnson sent him to Scotland to mislead the Queen about the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. And then, of course, Johnson set him up to try and get Owen Paterson off the hook for breaking parliamentary standards by ripping up the parliamentary standards. So, I mean, the closer you get to Johnson, the thicker the stench, the stronger the stench. And few got closer than Jacob Rees-Mogg. But he still maintained that illusion of his own intelligence and thinking that he could come up with zingers or... And he was doing it in the House of Commons yesterday, where he got, I mean, absolutely rinsed by Harriet Harman.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable and Learned Lady, but I wonder if she could say something of her own position in relation to the precedent set by the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords, when a decision on which Lord Hoffman was involved was set aside not because he was biased, but because of the perception of bias. In relation to her famous tweets, how does she think she met the Hoffman test?
Well, I'm happy to answer the point that's made. I was appointed by this House in the expectation that I would chair the committee with no one speaking against it. After the tweets were brought to light and were highlighted, because I am concerned about the perception of fairness on the committee, and I agree that perception matters, I made it my business to find out whether or not it would mean that the government would not have confidence in me if I continued to chair the committee. And I actually said I am more than happy to step aside because perception matters, and I don't want to do this if the government doesn't have confidence in me, because I need the whole House to have confidence in the work that the committee has mandated. And I was assured that I should continue the work that the House had mandated with the appointment that the House had put me into, and so I did just that.
Oh dear, I think that's a mic drop for Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I pity the person who has to explain to him what a mic is, let alone a mic drop. But, I mean, make no mistake, that is, in any normal country, that would be not career ending, but reputation shredding. Of course, we don't live in a normal country. We live in a country where Rees-Mogg will be popping up in a studio near you, imminently drawling incomprehensibly about issues he completely fails to understand. But this is a country where the class system is so embedded that talking twaddle in a posh accent can still be mistaken for talking sense. But there it was, thinking he was clever, thinking that he had a point, thinking that he had Harriet Harman over a barrel, and not knowing any of the facts. Why? Because the stench of Boris Johnson affects all of your senses. All of them. All of them. The person that would have told Harriet Harman that her concerns had been registered but were not considered to be relevant would have been the Chief Whip, the Tory Chief Whip. If he knew anything, he'd know that. He'd know that Harriet Harman was appointed by the House of Commons. He'd know that the Privileges Committee had a majority. He'd know that it was an anonymous vote. So even if they got rid of Harriet Harman and Bernard Jenkin, it would still be a unanimous, not anonymous, a unanimous vote. It's just pathetic. And the point at which I stopped asking you, I don't know whether you noticed, I stopped asking you whether you know that they're lying, whether they know that they're lying, or whether they are actually so signed up to the sort of cultish dedication that they've lost sight of what the truth is. That's evidence there. He doesn't know anymore what's true and what isn't true. It's all flags and feelings, and the facts disappeared. And there's the proof, because he should never have humiliated himself like that. You could see it from a mile away, see it from 100 miles away. It was some obscure reference to a previous precedent that has absolutely nothing to do with the one that Harriet Harman, with the situation that Harriet Harman found herself in. Just Jacob Rees-Mogg in a nutshell. Ignorant, arrogant, owned. Hassan's in Borehamwood. Hassan, what would you like to say?
Hi, so my local MP is Oliver Dowden.
Oh yes.
And I believe he didn't vote. I'm not sure if he was absentee or if he didn't turn up.
I think I may have over-egged that pudding. I don't think it matters much, to be honest, does it? Really?
But, yeah. Either way, I mean,
didn't
for
vote.
me,
Didn't vote. Oliver Dowden didn't vote.
It's a dereliction of duty. This is your job. Like, what do you mean? Like, I couldn't turn up. I couldn't make it unless you're on government work doing something that prevents you from getting there. This is what you are paid to do.
Yep.
Like if you decided, James, on a Tuesday morning at 11 to 11:20, you know what? I don't really fancy it. I don't want to do this part of the phone in today. How's that going to affect your job? How is it going to affect my job if I don't turn up and do one? And this is the fundamental part of your job. You're here representing the people, your constituents, to vote on things in the Commons. That's the cornerstone of what you're there to do. Like, that is it. What do you mean that? I didn't really.
I know. Do you know what, Hassan? Some days it's the best job in the world. This, isn't it? Because it's like you're standing in the crowd and you're staring at the Emperor. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, and then you notice Hassan in Boreham Wood standing next to you, and he's shouting, "Oi! You got no clothes on, you dirty old git. Go put your bed." And that's just, it just is that simple, isn't it? It's your bloody job. Turn up and do it.
Yeah. And you're just like, oh, you know what? I feel like there's this system. This is your work. This is what you're paid to do.
And if you think it was wrong, this report, go and vote against it.
Yeah, show some minerals.
Show some minerals, he says. Show some minerals.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I'm not a Tory voter. And let me be honest. Fiscally, being a Tory, voting Tory is probably in my best interest traditionally.
Snap.
Right? That's where I.
Yeah, sure. Same for me, actually.
But socially, I'm much more left leaning. Okay, so he doesn't have my vote. He will never have my vote. But you're here representing me, and you're representing everyone in our constituency, and you're not doing your job.
You're not doing your job. It is dereliction of duty. Some of them were at a party, apparently. I think Johnson was Johnson himself having a birthday party? I can't. Maybe I imagined that. I can't. Where was 30p Lee, for example? You'd have thought he'd be there, front of the queue, drawing attention to it. It's absolutely incredible. What are you going to do on this really important day in parliamentary history? I'm going to take the day off, actually, lads. I think I'll probably go and watch the cricket.
I mean, I'm just like anyone else in any walk of life. If you just don't show up, the difference is that you get to show up and you get your review every 5 years.
You should get their pay docked.
100%. Right. The thing is that it's like every 5 years you get your review here, and you get your review amongst people that there's so much to consider, your own life, your own bits that you.
What was Sunak playing at then? What was because listen, here are some answers for the people you're describing. Oliver Dowden, maybe he thinks Johnson might still make a comeback and would like to be on his team. Again, he thinks that it was. I don't quite understand the argument about it being unfair because it's the committee's decision to make that decision, not theirs. So Sunak didn't turn up. What was that all about? Briefly,
to be honest, to me it seems like you're answerable to what you feel is media outlets that are aggressive, and you're not answerable to the people you actually work for.
I was writing.
You actually work for us, and you feel you're answerable to the headlines that will come up that may attack who you are.
I was writing yesterday about those two male front pages, the Enemies of the People one about the High Court judges and the Crush the Saboteurs one after Theresa May called that early general election. And I'd lost sight of the insightful nature of those front pages of the Daily Mail. The judge, the most senior judge in England and Wales, told a parliamentary committee later that it was the only time in his career, Hassan, he'd done Al Qaeda cases. He'd done Al Qaeda cases. The only time in his career he sought advice from the police about his own personal safety was after the Daily Mail stuck his face on the front page of their newspaper and put Enemies of People enemies of the people across it. And the Crush the Saboteur stuff was directed at MPs. It was directed at MPs doing their duty. So some people listening might think you exaggerate when you say it could be fear
look at Joe Cox.
Yeah.
Joe Cox. I'm not putting the blame solely on the right-wing media outlets so in the run-up to Brexit, but there was
just
a
leave
frenzy.
the butt hanging. Leave the butt hanging, and remind yourself that the Daily Mail put the sentencing of her terrorist killer on page 26 of the newspaper that morning. And that's not something I have at my fingertips ordinarily, but that is the chapter of my new book that I'm currently working on. Hassan's there, isn't he? Sometimes you got to get closer to the screen, not further away. Sometimes you just got to go, what? You didn't turn up? Just talk me through that again. You didn't even turn up. The 6, and I think you add Desmond Swain to this list. So, Bill Cash, which is unfortunate, given that I've known him since I was in short trousers. Nick Fletcher, who I think delivered one of the most ridiculous speeches of the day. Adam Holloway, Carl McCartney, Joy Morrissey, who is a kind of prototype Nadine Dorries, and someone called Mrs. Heather Wheeler, who hadn't previously troubled these particular scorers. So they voted against the bill. I mean, ridiculous and wrong though that is, it's not impossible that they demonstrated what Hassan would call minerals. They demonstrated more minerals than all the cowards and creeps who didn't even vote. It's 10:45. 10:49 is the time. Park Rishi Sunak for a bit. We might do a whole hour on what the hell he thinks he was playing at. Imagine you were an advisor to Rishi. You might need to close your eyes for this. Not if you're driving, obviously. But just close your mind. You've got a new job, yeah? You're an advisor to Rishi Sunak, which means you almost certainly used to be the political editor of the Daily Mail, The Sun or The Spectator, so congratulations. And now you work for the Tory party. Now you've gone through that revolving door, straight into Downing Street. You're advising Rishi Sunak. He says, what do you think? What do you think, chaps? Do you think I should, what should I do tomorrow? And someone said to him, I think you should hide and pretend that the Swedish Prime Minister is holding you hostage in your own house. Really? You think that will work? Of course it will. We sold these clowns Brexit, mate. They'll swallow anything. Well, so park Rishi Sunak. Focus for the moment on the other MPs. The hell had the Prime Minister not turn up to vote? Interesting point, this. 118 Conservative MPs voted for the motion. I think that's important. And I think that's a lot, probably more than I expected, including some names that may surprise you, like Brexit hardman Steve Baker, although he, of course, has what you'd call it, softened his hardness in recent months. David Davis, again, less surprising, but these are the known names, if you like, the known knowns. Bernard Jenkins, no surprises there. God, he looks cheerful in his parliamentary picture. We're having our new photos taken tomorrow, actually. That's just reminded me I must get a haircut. The 118, and then of the Labour members, because of course there's an 80-seat majority, 173. So 118 Tories, 173 Labour, and then 6 independents. That makes a mockery of the claims that it's some sort of Labour conspiracy to go to a division. So I was tempted. I had a little chat with Eleanor, the producer, in that little break there about the next hour. Do we focus on Rishi Sunak, or do we do something really childish and just ask who you think the worst is? And as is her job on most mornings, she's talked me out of doing the really childish thing and focused instead on something that could be described as a little bit more grown up. But the only reason I asked is people keep sending me pictures of Brendan Clark-Smith, which is really unfair, frankly, just generally, in any circumstances. I don't think anyone should send anyone pictures of Brendan Clark-Smith. It's just not very nice. It's a bit mean. But he doesn't seem to know whether he's coming or going. He claimed at one point that he was going to vote against, but he wouldn't because he wasn't going to give others the satisfaction of taking part in their silly games with a division. So he thought there wouldn't be a division. I think you're all sending me pictures of this strange character because he did actually go to the cricket. I was joking earlier when I said, some of them would be completely derelict enough, sufficiently derelict to go to the cricket instead. Is he wearing a tie with pictures of kangaroos on it as well? Oh, God. You know exactly the kind of character this man is, don't you? He's the kind of character who has a little sign up behind his desk that says, you don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps. It probably wears novelty socks as well. Anyway, he didn't think there'd be a division, which is why he went to the cricket, and then there was a division. So, I mean, he looked stupid from every imaginable angle. Quite breathtaking, really. And then on the, I think the fact that the Labour chief whip would have bellowed no at the top of his voice when the Speaker asked whether MPs supported the Johnson report means it has to go to a means it has to go to a vote. More pertinently, 118 Tories. 118 Tories actually followed their conscience. So what do we think of the ones what didn't? Ben's in Leicester. Ben, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello,
First time caller.
You're very welcome.
My MP is Neil O'Brien.
No relation.
I'm sure it's not. And yeah, good for you, because I believe he didn't vote yesterday. But I'm a 26-year-old lad.
Yeah.
I've lived in quite a few constituencies around Leicester. Unfortunately, I lived under Andrew Bridgen at one point as well.
Good God.
So yeah, I'm not going to put that in your autobiography.
No.
But it's what's happened is I'm a working class guy, and I've kind of, through methods unfortunately taught by yourself, I've kind of alienated myself away from friends and family who think I'm kind of a bit crackers for monitoring politics and looking out for politics.
You don't have to talk about it all the time. You can monitor it and engage, but you don't have to hit people over the head. I just worry about your social life. Now you've blamed me for your lack of one. I
wasn't blaming you, James.
No.
And I try not to. It's a bit like religion. Some people have one,
That's
but
very
not
true.
everybody wants to hear it.
Yeah, exactly that.
But I have a method of Socratic questioning. When people give me things like, we need to blame immigrants, we need to, all these people, they're here, there and everywhere, let's blame these people. I just ask them simply where they get their facts from.
Yes.
Where is this information coming from? It's less about what you think and why you think it. And it makes people think that I don't like them because I'm not believing what they're saying.
And they don't like it. I mean, I still do it as well out in the wild sometimes. I had a conversation the other night with someone who was claiming that Dominic Raab had been more sinned against than sinning, and the getting to the source of where on earth that idea could possibly have come from is actually fascinating, but the person that you're questioning doesn't really enjoy it. You're quite right.
Exactly. And go back to the vote yesterday. I mean, it was... The hypocrisy of it is kind of belly laughingly, it fills me with kind of, it's a bit sort of satirical, the idea of going through Brexit was your parliamentary right. It was the democracy of all this was that you have a vote and we are going to help you decide what vote you do. And then when it comes to the crunch and the MPs have got an opportunity to vote on their own standards within Parliament, they decide to take a hiatus to TGI Friday.
Go on the Aperol spritzes. You know that I try not to reference it too often. The reason why I'm stuck in certain areas of the recent political past. I was writing about Gina Miller, and her whole bill was designed to protect parliamentary sovereignty. When she was coming under massive attack from all sorts of corners, horrible abuse, the newspapers constantly described her as a foreign-born millionaire without mentioning that their own owner is a foreign-born billionaire. And that was about parliamentary sovereignty. That was about not triggering Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty without a parliamentary vote. She was literally defending parliamentary sovereignty, and yet she was turned into public enemy number one by precisely the same clowns and liars who claimed that they were the ones most concerned about parliamentary sovereignty. And you're right. Yesterday's another example of that. The only question is, are they too thick to realise what they're doing, or is their hypocrisy so baked in that they are comfortable with it? That they, that is it.
It's more like, what are they gaining from it?
Yeah, that's the question.
What is the thing that they can tuck themselves in at bed at night and go, oh, thank the Lord that I didn't go into Parliament today and vote against that.
Yeah, go me. Go me.
This instead.
People have pointed out, Brendan Clark-Smith ended up going to the cricket wearing a tie with a kangaroo on it without perhaps realising that England were playing against Australia.
They're all hopping mad, James.
Well played, Ben. Stay safe, mate. 10:56 is the time. Richard's in Shrewsbury. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, I was thinking the first caller that you had mentioned that their MP said that it was the strength of the sanction that they didn't feel was appropriate.
Yes.
And that isn't an excuse, because if that's your feeling, you were able to table an amendment. The motion was open to amendments, so that was made very clear. And that's where you say, I agree with this, but I don't think 90 days is appropriate because of such and such. And if you believe that, then you should believe that people on your side will vote for you. And it goes for everything Rees-Mogg said in his, not when he got slapped down, but when he tried to make his own points later on, because he was trying to do that thing that you were referencing earlier, the technicalities or the precedent. That is exactly where you table an amendment, because if you're saying that something doesn't stand because it was based on an error, you get it crossed off. You say the report has recommended this and this and this, but we note that in paragraph such and such they say this, and that is incorrect, and we would want to acknowledge it, and then you get people to vote on it.
It's all open to amendment and all open to explanation. And that line, I'm surprised even he stooped that low to still be banging the how can people possibly know what was in his mind defence, which was pulled apart so completely by you need to be stubborn and stupid, don't you?
Yeah,
you need to be stubborn and stupid, and then you go. Sorry, carry on.
When he said it, because normally he uses the flowery language, doesn't he? And
he tries to.
Lord Melville, according to Erskine May in 1960, but on that occasion he actually said something along the lines of, "They must have thought that Johnson had a musk particle in his head."
Yes.
Like, what on earth are you talking about?
I don't think he could answer that anymore. I don't think he could answer that. And I'll tell you what, he's going to absolutely flip his lid when he finds out how courts work. Isn't he? And the idea that you're not allowed to speculate upon what the motivation of a defendant might have been. Thank you, Richard. Oh, man. I'm going to continue with this because it is absolutely fascinating, even if people who've spent the last 10 years blowing smoke up Boris Johnson's backside are desperate to pretend that it isn't. And in that category, of course, I include all newspaper editors, most columnists and almost all commentators. They'll be studying this. Your children will be studying this in years to come. Quite possibly their children will as well. These arcades, like in 73 when I think there were two elections and one of them saw the party with the most votes come second. These weird little political anomalies. Who was the Prime Minister that within 12 months of leaving office was deprived of a parliamentary pass by his own colleagues, including 118 of his own party, because he was a massive liar? Who was that then? It's 3 minutes after 11. By popular demand, we're going mature and immature for the next day. So we are going to do who are the worst characters in this awful pantomime. Simon Clark. So I've given you Brendan Clark Smith, a truly ridiculous figure, wearing a kangaroo tie. It's because it's a kangaroo court, you see. Not thinking for a minute that perhaps a test match between England and Australia, which I presume is the cricket he was going to. I can't think what other cricket there was to watch yesterday. A kangaroo might perhaps be a slightly ill-advised sartorial choice. I've got another contender for you coming up in just a moment. But who is the worst out of all of them? Who comes out of this worst? And because my answer to that question is Rishi Sunak, the mature element of the next conversation will be about him. Why didn't he vote? All right, and you're not allowed to say because he was being held hostage in his own house by the Swedish Prime Minister. There's absolutely no way on earth that Rishi Sunak couldn't have voted if he wanted to, right? Absolutely no way on earth. He chose not to vote. I think it's too easy and too obvious to say because he's a cowardly custard. I want something that sounds a bit cleverer than that. I also want to know, like I almost always want to know on this programme, I want to know what you're thinking. How do you feel about having a Prime Minister? Or rather, what do you think about having a Prime Minister who bottled this? He ducked it. It's only a week ago he's claiming tough. If you don't like it, if people don't like it, Boris Johnson asked me to do something I wasn't prepared to do. And if you don't like it, tough. Fast forward a week, Boris Johnson found to be a serial and egregious liar by a committee with a Conservative majority appointed by the House of Commons. Rishi Sunak, are you going to vote for or against? No. What? Hang on a minute. It's not a yes-no question. It's for or against. Are you going to vote for or against? No, I'm not. No, hang on. For or against? No. What's that all about? 0345 6060 973. Bob Seeley, early contender for the worst character in this whole pantomime. He has appeared on Newsnight, I think, twice in the last few weeks, appearing with Victoria Derbyshire. If we were having a phone-in about people who've emerged best from this sorry saga in British politics, I think Victoria would be fairly near the top of the tree, and I appreciate that's quite a charge. He's appeared twice, I think, on Newsnight in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Let's start with the second time. So this is Bob Seeley, if you're on the Isle of Wight, you lucky people. This is your MP on Newsnight last night.
A week last Friday on Newsnight, you described the Privileges Committee as a kangaroo court.
I don't think I did.
You absolutely did, because I watched the interview again today.
I didn't think I was on Newsnight last week at all.
A week last Friday you were.
And here is the Isle of Wight MP Bob Seeley on Newsnight a week last Friday.
Despite everything that David says, and I have a lot of sympathy with some of the issues raised by this kangaroo court, the fact is that we need to move on.
This doesn't happen very often. I mean, listen, forgive the Anaraki element of my engagement with this. That is so illustrative of what Johnson does to people. I'm going to have to... Because here's the thing, if you defend the indefensible... How many times have I said this to you? So Rees-Mogg gets rinsed by Harriet Harman yesterday. If you want to give him a break and say it's not because he's really, really stupid, you can. Here's your fig leaf. Here's your little olive branch. You can pretend... or even contend that it's because he is defending the indefensible. If you defend the indefensible, you end up bent double. But rarely does anybody bend themselves quite as double as Bob Seeley did last night. And I could play that again and again and again until the cows come home. He's not an MP I even know much about, but I know he must be a Boris Johnson loyalist. And I know that he had his pants pulled down on live national television in a way that, if he was a Labour MP, would haunt him for the rest of his life. Remember when Diane Abbott, she's an independent at the moment. I'd lost sight of that. I was looking at the votes from last night. Remember when Diane Abbott got her sums wrong in this studio, and how she's haunted by it? She wasn't even in government. Bob Seeley, Isle of Wight MP, absolutely exposed on live television. I bet you didn't even know about it until this moment. And because you may have missed it, you may have only just turned your radio on, I'm going to do it again. So here is Bob Seeley, Isle of Wight MP. I'll check how he voted, but I'll give you £5 if he did. I'll check how he voted. Here he is last night on Newsnight.
A week last Friday on Newsnight, you described the Privileges Committee as a kangaroo court.
I don't think I did.
You absolutely did, because I watched the interview again today.
I didn't think I was on Newsnight last week at all.
A week last Friday you were.
And here he is, a week last Friday.
Despite everything that David says, and I have a lot of sympathy with some of the issues raised by this kangaroo court, the fact is that we need to move on.
I owe you £5. Get it out of the tin, Keith. I owe you £5. It's how you voted for it. But it doesn't, of course, undermine the absolute shame of that kangaroo court claim and the subsequent debagging live on national television. What on earth is going on in the mind of someone like that? That's an even bigger flip-flop. Using the kangaroo court language, which puts him in contempt of Parliament, and then voting for the report. So he voted for something he described as a kangaroo court. The mind boggles. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. Michael is in Birmingham. Michael, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. And to be honest with you, it'd be nice to know where our Tory MPs are for our area. You know, at least if, you know, the ones who have crawled out the woodwork to kind of defend their position.
Yes.
At least you know where they stand.
Yes.
But at the minute, I feel like putting out an advert on the side of a milk carton. Where are our Tory MPs?
Yes.
But the problem is, across the party, even the ones that did bother to show up to cast their vote last night, in every shade of blue there is, you've got a coward. Yeah. You know, one of the MPs that represents our area, Nicola Richards, you know, has a semblance of a conscience.
Yeah.
She resigned during the ousting of Johnson, voted in favour of the report last night, but she's doing the chicken run. She's stood down for you know, the constituency of West Bromwich East, because she knows that support for people like her, who were brought in on that, you know, that sludge of get Brexit done,
yes,
have been completely eradicated. That support base has gone.
Doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist. So she's running away. Even if she's not running away from this vote, she runs away to a different selection contest, you know, a safe Tory.
She's announced she's not standing, has she?
Yeah, this was a couple of months ago.
No, I thought so. It's hard to keep up, mate.
It really is. But even, you know, on the other side of the coin, let's look at a staunch Johnsonite. Let's look at Sean Bailey, not the one you're thinking of.
No, we need to clarify. I'm sure there are many more than two Sean Baileys, but in the context of Conservative politics, there is the bloke whose office hosted that massive party, the Jingle Mingle party, that the Met Police are now investigating, and who was running for Mayor of London, although I don't think he was there when the actual dancing unfolded. He was certainly pictured in a photograph. But the one you're referring to is the MP for West Bromwich West. East.
That's the one, yeah.
East, West? West.
That one's West, yeah. It's really hard to... they're basically the same shades, aren't they? So just... a bit silly. Anyway, so
what did he do?
You know, this huge... So he's this huge Johnson supporter, you know, even during his ousting, vocally supporting over his social media, because he's never in his constituency to actually say it in person, otherwise someone will challenge him on his frankly idiotic opinion. But, you know, it's this thing of, well, I'll be honest with you, the thing that he will forever be known for around here, it's even if the Johnson support fades away, even if he doesn't become one of these, you know, sycophantic cheerleaders, he'll be known as somebody who put his vote to starve hungry children in COVID. He voted down the free school meals, and a prominent piece of graffiti
They almost
appeared.
all did, though, didn't they? I mean, this lot.
Oh, yeah. They're all of the same ilk.
Until Marcus Rashford came along. Sorry, go on.
No problem. So this startling piece of graffiti appeared in his constituency, like plastered against the outer wall of a church.
It's not rude, is it?
I wish it was, because then I could say it on live radio, but it wasn't. It just said, Sean Bailey starves hungry children. And he in this Johnson-esque spin, he turned this into an issue of antisocial behaviour. But that's the playbook. You know, silence the criticism of whatever it is you've done so that you can be abstained of your guilt. That's all
you can't. I mean, you've got a lot off your chest today, Michael. You've been waiting a while to get on, have you?
I've been waiting a while to speak to Sean Bailey. I'd love to have a chat with him.
I can see why. And the motivation for not voting at all in his particular case, because you're clearly a student of his career. He's only been there for 4 years. Whether he'll be there for much longer, only time will tell. But to not vote at all, are they just going to hope? I don't quite get it. They hope that Johnson's coming back, or they hope that. What do you reckon?
Well, I think it's more than that. I think it's no longer about representing people. It's no longer about being a career parliamentarian. It's just self-preservation. It's the I'm all right, Jack, you know, let the bodies pile high. It's sickening. And these people get into these positions by preying on the insecurities of the people who put them there. I'll give you an example.
Quickly.
Very quickly, my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's about 8 years ago. It's a dreadful thing to have happened.
I'm sorry.
He saw the lie on the side of the bus, and I hate to bring Brexit back into it, £350 million for the NHS. He saw a ticket to a better life dealing with his condition, and he was lied to.
Better treatment, he was. No, and I'm glad you've made that point, actually, Michael. I tease people sometimes about bringing Brexit into things. It's almost impossible not to, but the decent people persuaded to vote for the impossible by liars. It has to be the starting point of undoing the damage whenever that time comes, or indeed whenever, what's his chops, Keir Starmer gets around to trying. 14 minutes after 11 is the time. There's some nice stuff coming in. This is nice. Was it Caroline Noakes I sat next to at the Kebab Awards? I have to be careful. The last Tory I sat next to at the Kebab Awards was David Warburton, who's just announced that he won't be running again after getting into all sorts of bother. I can say bother, can't I? He's in a. So you've got to be careful who you sit next to at these. I sat next to Caroline Noakes. I really liked her. And so does John in Southampton. He goes, I've just voted. I've just emailed her. She voted for the motion yesterday. I received a reply back. She's an excellent MP, a good Tory. And in Parliament, there's not too many of them. And don't send me her voting record at this point. I know. Rory Stewart seems like a nice bloke, voted for all of the austerity stuff. But I just think that political engagement and political debate has to accept players from more than one team. Otherwise, there's no debate and no engagement. There's no politics. Oh, they're all awful. They're all shocking. I don't think the ones that deserve to be pilloried get pilloried much more than they do on this show. But until I'm absolutely old and broken, I'm not going to give up the hope that there can be good politicians, good parliamentarians on both sides. Do you know who the only... I've forgotten what vote it was now. Someone will remember. Ken Clarke was the only one to... I think it must have been a whip-defying vote, mustn't it? So then it would have been under Johnson. 11:15 is the time. It is 11:17 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's just nudge it along to Rishi Sunak now, okay? The actual Prime Minister. Why did Rishi Sunak not turn up in Parliament yesterday? And I would remind you that the Prime Minister sought last week to be tough. I mean, he actually used the word tough. I think this is an important juxtaposition. We did it yesterday on the show. We played out both clips where he says, Boris Johnson is about putting ridiculous candidates into the House of Lords. He said, Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I thought was wrong and I refused to go along with it. And if you don't like that, tough. And then there's this pause and then there's about four or five people start clapping. And it was mildly and briefly impressive. A week later, here's a vote. It's a really big deal. It is on the report that found Boris Johnson to be a serial liar. It will deprive him of his parliamentary pass, but more importantly, it will uphold parliamentary sovereignty and actually enforce the committee procedures, enforce the select committee system in the face of appalling abuse visited upon it by people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Bob Seeley, although he conveniently forgot the appalling abuse that he'd visited upon it a week last Friday. What's he done? Why has he done that? Go on. Seriously, thinking caps on. Why has Sunak not done that? He's not worried about losing his seat in Richmond. He's the Prime Minister. He's not fussed about. If Johnson makes a comeback, Sunak's not going to have a big job, is he? You can say that with a modicum of confidence. So why did Sunak bottle it yesterday? And of course, that's a loaded question. You can tell me that I'm wrong to use the phrase bottled. He didn't bottle it. I don't think I can let you come on and claim that he really couldn't get away from his meeting with the Swedish Prime Minister. I think if anyone's going to understand what politics is like for a Prime Minister, it would be a Prime Minister. So maybe it floats. You can try and float it. Neil suggests maybe he lost his shoes. What are you talking about? That makes me laugh. I don't get the joke. Is it just a mad, surreal joke? Or is there a joke about shoes? Maybe he lost his shoes. You silly sausage, Neil. Why? Where was he? No, not where. We know where. Why? Why wasn't he there? What was he playing? What was Rishi Sunak playing at? 20 minutes after 11 is the time. And also, we're taking nominations for who emerges from this absolute clown show with the least credit. And then, because you're such a nice bunch, as soon as I ask a question about who comes out of it worse, you start ringing me up with suggestions of who's come out of it well or who's come out of it best. I wouldn't even have thought of that. George is in Portsmouth. George, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
it's great to be on it. I've been a listener for about a year. And,
welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that behind Sunak's kind of veil of like strength and integrity and like prosperity is just a coward.
Yeah.
He just doesn't understand how to be a leader with strength. He doesn't know how to push the line against like the Boris branch of the party. He cannot truly commit to one side or the other. He just doesn't know how to show true leadership at the end of the day.
He's never had to, and he probably never really thought of himself as a coward. He probably still doesn't. I don't imagine many cowards do realise that they're cowards, but it's such an effortless glide. It's why that question Beth Rigby asked him a while ago was so clever, when she just said, well, how do you cope with failure? You've never had any failure in your life after the council elections. And it was as if, looking at his face, it was as if Beth was speaking Chinese. He just couldn't compute. So such an effortless glide means that you could probably conceive of yourself as being a leader because all you've ever had to do was find out which way the crowd was running and get yourself in front of it. And that now, when leadership is really needed, he's nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think on the topic of local MPs, my MP is Penny Mordaunt. She's the Commons Speaker, woman, held the sword and all that. That's what she's most famous for, apparently. That's what makes a good leader.
Designed her own outfit as well that day.
Yeah,
did you know that?
I think she did drugs for that, didn't she?
That's sensational. And her leadership credentials rocketed after the coronation. What's she done to see her favourability polling go up? She held the sword. I mean, to be fair, there's people in the Tory party that you'd imagine would have needed help holding it up for that long, but Penny Mordaunt did well.
Yeah, I mean, she's really popular around here for some reason. She did that charity thing for the Hills Lider, and I think that in general, for her parliamentary career, she's probably shown more of a backbone than Sunak, which I think really shows how low we've gone in leadership qualities, that someone who holds a sword and does a charity event 10 years before is a better leader than like the Chancellor of the Executive.
Well, she nearly was leader, wasn't she? There's so much shenanigans lately. It's hard to keep track and remember correctly what went on. But I think she was doing really well until there was some sort of intervention. Was it Braverman throwing her weight behind Sunak, or?
No, I think it was Badenoch, actually.
Was it Badenoch? It's one of them. And she was well placed for a while, Penny Mordaunt, remarkably, perhaps.
Yeah, she was like top of the polls in most of the betting sites and stuff, and she was really popular, and everyone around here wanted her to be a leader, but I guess that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
I mean, never say never. So back to Sunak. I don't think I can let you get away with just saying cowardly custard in terms. Why didn't he go? What if you're his advisor, George? And with a name like George, you could easily be a Downing Street advisor. So
I'm flattered, mate, honestly.
No, you'll be good. Welcome aboard. Are you on secondment from the Sun or the Spectator, or possibly the Daily Mail? Anyway, we're very glad you're here. Very glad you've arrived a bit late. We used to have some wonderful parties during lockdown, but never mind. On we go. So I'm Rishi Sunak. You're George, the advisor. All right. But if I go, George, and I vote for the report, like I said last week, tough. If you don't like it, tough. What's the problem? What could possibly go wrong, George?
Well, I think, Sunak, what you'll find is that the Boris branch is still very popular around the voter base. So I think that you will lose an integral.
But I'm not going to lose Rich. Oh, so he's thinking about the general election optics rather than the Richmond.
I think that, yeah.
Who else are they going to vote for? They're not going to vote for Keir Starmer, are they? The people, the Boris base, are in my pocket.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what he worries about is another kind of UKIP situation where they vote for one of those reform law or the...
and they fetishise Boris Johnson. They continue to fetishise Boris Johnson while simultaneously blaming him for the failure of Brexit. I mean, again, that's one of the reasons why Nigel Farage should never be allowed out without a chaperone. I might start a party with Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson is also responsible for Brexit going so badly. Okay, mate, stay away from scissors. Thank you, George. Lovely debut. Moses is in Ealing. Moses, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. I'm actually in here in support of Mr. Sunak.
Excellent.
There's an election next year. He needs to do party management.
He does.
He doesn't have the whole party on his side. Boris Johnson is, like the gentleman said beforehand, he's popular with the party base. What do you want him to do, Mr. O'Brien? What do you want him to do? Just throw the bathwater out.
I want him to prioritise the country and Parliament over party management, Moses.
Well, then we shouldn't have political parties, then, should we?
Just expand on that point a little.
Well, the point is...
let me remind you what you're expanding on. You're explaining why we shouldn't have political parties.
Yes, we shouldn't have political... Well, if the argument is that we should put country before party management...
The Prime Minister should do that.
Yeah, I understand that, but he still has... We elect parties. We don't elect the Prime Minister.
No, he is the Prime Minister, and I'm suggesting he should put parliamentary sovereignty simply the protection of the select committee system. As Prime Minister, he should put that above party politics or party management. And your response was saying, well, then we shouldn't have parties. And I just want you to explain that a bit more.
Yes. The point is as follows. He is the leader of a political party.
Yes.
You didn't vote for him. Did you vote for him? I didn't vote for him. He got there by being the leader of the political party.
Yes.
So for him to continue to be a leader of the political party, he has to lead a political party into an election.
Yes.
And he won't be able to lead the political party into election if he puts a sword, using the sword analogy, puts a sword right through the Conservative Party by antagonising the swivel-eyed loonies.
But Moses, it was his resignation as Chancellor that finished Boris Johnson off as Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson isn't even an MP anymore.
No, but it's the effect of what will happen if he votes against Boris Johnson.
No, but his resignation as Chancellor finished off Boris Johnson.
I understand that.
Right. So he's already run a sword through Boris Johnson, metaphorically speaking.
Well, you're proving my point for me, Mr. O'Brien.
I'm sure I am, Moses, and you're going to explain how now.
Yeah, okay. Then after he got rid of Boris Johnson and he stood up against Liz Truss, what happened?
He became Prime Minister.
No, he didn't become Prime Minister. Liz Truss became Prime Minister because they chose Liz Truss over Sunak for getting rid of Boris Johnson.
No. After it covers a significant period of time. Okay. It covers everything that happened after Boris Johnson ceased to be Prime Minister, and after Boris Johnson ceased to be Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. But let's go back to me proving your point because
you're obfuscating.
Yes.
Who came Prime
No,
Minister?
I'm not obfuscating. I'm proving your point.
No, you're not. Who came?
But you just said I was. You just said I was.
Yeah, you are, but you're chosen...
So am I obfuscating? Hang on, let's just take one obstacle at a time. Am I obfuscating or am I proving your point?
No, you're obfuscating by missing out that list.
So when did I stop proving your point?
You stopped proving your point when you just ignored our Prime Minister for 56 days.
Right.
Like she didn't exist.
Okay, so let's clarify that. Liz Truss definitely exists, and she was Prime Minister for 56 days. So now let's go back to how I proved. No, again, Moses. One obstacle at a time. Let's go back to how I proved. Actually, let's go back further. What is your point?
My point is as follows. If he does not do party management, and if he doesn't do party management, he will, A, not be a leader.
Yes.
Or there's going to be a rebellion and the Conservative Party is going to get rid of him by the autumn.
Right. So if he'd voted for the report yesterday, you think the Conservative Party would have got rid of him by the autumn?
By the autumn.
Okay. Why didn't you just say that when you came on?
No, but my point is this.
No, that was your point.
No.
Yes.
The point where you agree with me. No, hang on a minute. Allow me to speak.
Well, I am allowing you to speak. I'm barely getting a word in edgeways.
Yeah, when he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back.
Yes.
The party
front. Stabbed him in the. Moses stabbed him in the front.
No, he stabbed him in the front. It doesn't matter where he stabbed him.
Well, it does matter because he stabbed him in the front.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what happened when he stood up? He stood up for the party members. Who did they choose? Did they choose him or did they choose Liz Truss?
The party members chose Liz Truss. We've already established that, Moses. And after that, I think there was some racism involved.
No, I don't think so.
Well, you asked me why. You didn't tell me you were going to tell me why you think why. You asked me why.
They told you why. Because
stop obfuscating.
No, they stabbed him in the front.
They did.
Yes.
He did.
That's why they didn't vote for him, right?
No.
Oh. So why didn't they vote for him then?
Well, I told you.
That's the main reason.
The main reason. I told you why they didn't. They didn't vote for him because I think there was quite a lot of racism involved.
Yeah, there is that. You have. I know. A small part.
I know.
But the point.
No, a big part. A big part.
But you have two people. You either choose someone from Asian background or you choose a woman.
Yes.
They don't want to choose a woman either.
Hey.
No, they don't want to.
That's not racism. Being a woman's not a race.
No, it's a discriminatory behaviour. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, Moses.
It's a discriminatory behaviour.
Well, I'll tell you what, mate. At least we can agree on one thing.
What?
I certainly proved your point. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines. 33 minutes after 11. That's news you just heard, I think, in the bulletin. The Andrew Tate character charged with rape and human trafficking in Romania. I don't know there's much to add to that, but it's a grim business. Much closer to home and rather less seriously, Nadine Dorries has had another nightmare. The Parliamentary Standards Committee has cleared the SNP Member of Parliament, John Nicholson, of her accusations of bullying. That's a Westminster Standards panel. More on that shortly. But we do know, don't we, that Dorries accuses everybody who points out the truth to her of bullying. She libelled me under the protection of parliamentary privilege in a select committee hearing. One of the ones, I think, where John Nicholson was holding her to account. But that's what cowards do. They accuse everybody else of bogus victimhood. Absolutely pathetic. What's astonishing now that Dorries and Boris Johnson have got columns at the Daily Mail is that the Daily Mail has somehow managed to lower the calibre of columnist from where it was a few months ago. If you'd said to me, no, mate, they can go lower. They can go lower than that. I'd have said, don't be ridiculous. Who are they going to hire as a columnist? I mean, how could they possibly go lower? And now you've got Dorries and the serial proven liar Boris Johnson, both writing columns for that newspaper. So we may try to catch up with John Nicholson, find out a little bit more about that. But some breaking news for you there. He's been cleared of accusations of bullying Nadine Dorries by a Westminster Standards panel. I don't think she could call him a posh boy, could she? But that, of course, is another criticism that she levels at anybody who dares to either point out how stupid and wrong she is about almost everything or tells the truth about her and her career. 25 to 12 is the time. Back to Rishi Sunak. Couple of phone lines open, 0345 60 60973. Why didn't he turn up yesterday? Why didn't he turn up yesterday? The Prime Minister of these islands, having essentially said last week, I stood up to Boris Johnson, and if you don't like it, tough. So he has demonstrated his willingness and toughness in the face of Boris Johnson's appalling behaviour on that occasion, trying to nominate wholly unsuitable candidates for the House of Lords or sidestep the system. And yet a week later, he's bottled it. Why? Why is that? Matt's in Witheridge in Devon. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
This proves, I think, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Rishi Sunak knows the Tories are going to lose the next election, and he is convinced that it's very likely Boris Johnson will be the leader of the opposition.
Nah.
And I think Boris Johnson has promised him Shadow Chancellor.
Oh, just flipping heck! I thought we'd peaked with Moses. There's absolutely no way that you can't put anything past Johnson, I suppose. But the Johnson-Sunak ticket in opposition, never going to happen. He'll be back in California, mate.
He's just, the fact that he's, the mayor of... He has this following, though, Johnson.
That's
no
true.
Idea why.
Well, it does. It's not. It's gone. To be honest, all of the polling. The problem is that the newspaper editors love him, and he retains some popularity with the Conservative Party membership, but nowhere near what it could be or once was. It's a bit of a myth. It's a myth concocted by newspaper editors and Twitter, weirdos on Twitter with pictures of dogs as their avatars and hashtag Bring Back Boris in their profiles. He's not the king across the water. He did have once. There was a slim chance there when Truss got seen off by the lettuce. There's a slim chance a way back in because the membership still liked him, but he would never have been able to put together a government in Parliament because the parliamentary party weren't going to stand for it. So I don't buy this. I don't think it's true.
I hope you're right, James, and I think...
I usually am, Matt.
Yeah, I know. I've been listening for long enough. I think in reality, you probably are, but I do think there is still this perception in the Tory party that Johnson is still something worth keeping hold of and could.
But he saw him off.
I think they believe it.
He saw him
Sunak
off.
Has fallen for it as well.
And then we're back to the last caller in a way. How could voting for the report, which was, of course, compiled by a Conservative majority select committee, how could that somehow damage Sunak more in the eyes of Johnson cultists than being the leader of the coup what got rid of him? That's the killer question, mate. Come on, wriggle off that hook, Matt.
Yeah, no, you've got a point with that one. Yeah. You've got a point, but
call Moses and explain it to him.
The Tories are so fractured, though.
Yes,
there's groups, isn't there? So even though I think did the majority of them vote for it yesterday? Is 118?
No.
Majority of Tories? No. Okay. So there's still a large group that, for some reason, are effectively, as far as I'm concerned, showing Parliament contempt. Not like actually, like the general use of the word contempt. They are showing, they're holding Parliament in contempt. You've got to ask
225 no vote. No, didn't vote, yeah.
And
so
there's
nearly
only
double.
one reason why. So they're making themselves look grubby. There's not this stuff. Abstaining doesn't go without cost. So you've got to ask why. What is it all about? And the only thing I've been asking that
since 10 o'clock this morning, man.
It's Johnson. It's that they still think, even though they're probably wrong, I do agree with you, they are probably wrong, and I hope they're wrong, they still are under his thrall. They're still...
Well, then we're Trump. Then we've gone full Trump, haven't we? Which I think...
Yeah.
I do agree with you there. I do think it doesn't matter what he does now. I think you remember seeing those Republicans before Trump got the nomination, and even before he won the election, they were Republicans who were prepared to tell the truth about him. But once he was over the line, it was all and then you can't go back, can you? Once you've given a free pass to the depravity, you can't go back. And so, whether that fits the description of all 225 Conservative MPs, that they nailed their colours to Johnson's riddled mast so completely they can never tear them off again, or whether it's more complicated than that. For a significant number of them, they just can't go back now. Just on a personal level, never mind a political or a constituency level, we can't go back. And they couldn't vote against... Why couldn't they vote against the bill if they can't go back? Because they didn't want to paint a target on their own backs in other ways, politically, I think, probably.
But these are people that tend to be very duplicitous and... that guy earlier, the Isle of Wight guy who said kangaroo, who said I didn't say kangaroo court, but said kangaroo court.
No, he didn't.
These are the kind of people these are the kind of people we're talking about.
Yes,
so
that's true. And he voted for it. He then voted for the report.
Yeah, but I mean, how could he not after that?
No, but I think he gave the interview.
Amazing.
No, I know. I mean, seriously, surreal moments. Yeah, there's a lot going on, Matt, and possibly my desperation always to find the neat one-size-fits-all answers to these questions is once again a little bit misplaced on this occasion. 11:41 is the time. If you think there's anything we've missed, do feel free to fill in the gaps on 0345 60973. So 7 loyalists voted in Johnson's favour. 225 Conservative MPs didn't vote. We did the first hour on why not, and the idea that there is one answer to that question, I think, got fairly well rinsed. There may be 225 answers to that question, but I think that's probably a little bit over the top as well. Major answer, not so much currying potential favour with Boris Johnson, although I was persuaded by that early doors. I think we forget the humanity of these people, and I'd mean that in a bad way. I mean the human frailty of these people as opposed to the humanity. And we must thank Bob Seeley for reminding us of that. The idea that there is consistency, or the idea that there would be a sort of logical, an ineluctably logical progression here, and you put two and get 4. That isn't true. So some of them will be failing to vote out of a combination of cowardice and dissonance. I can't go back. The ones that got damehoods, in particular, Priti Patel and Andrea Jenkins, the idea, what could Boris Johnson do that would lose their support? Just use them as examples. And Dorries, they're all women, that's probably not fair. Rees-Mogg put him on the list, he got a knighthood, didn't he? This Simon Clarke character who was tweeting about how he was going to vote against it and then didn't turn up, he got a knighthood as well, I think. So let's do 2 dames and 2 knights, right? The ones that got rewarded. Watch them closely. You've got Simon Clarke and Jacob Rees-Mogg, Andrea Jenkins and Priti Patel, okay? What could Boris Johnson do that would lose their support? I honestly think the answer to that question is nothing. In the same way that for Donald Trump now, there is nothing he can do that would lose the support of some of his key cheerleaders, up to and including lying about an election result, stealing secret documents from the White House, and inciting a potential coup on the steps of the Capitol building, inside the Capitol. Seriously, I know a lot of people, myself included, are reluctant to go full Trump because it's our country and we'd like to think we were somehow above that or better. But look at those 4, Priti Patel, Andrea Jenkins, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Simon Clarke. If you ever meet them, ask them, is there anything Boris Johnson could have done that would have lost your support? And it's actually a more complicated question than it sounds, because you're imagining it, you're seeing it through the lens of this conversation. So you're thinking, well, of course there is. He could do this or do... But you're not just taking your support away from Boris Johnson. This is really important. You're not just taking your support away from Boris Johnson when he does that thing that is so egregious you can no longer support him. You're taking something from within yourself. You are admitting an incredible mistake. You look at someone like Rees-Mogg or someone like Jenkins and look at the puppy dog devotion that they have to Boris Johnson. You can't take away your support. You can never take away your support, because to take away your support would make you question your very fibre, your very being. Nadine Dorries, without Boris Johnson, he is her sun and her moon. Imagine that. To take away her support from Boris, her entire solar system would collapse. So we can sit here and do it objectively. We can look at it all through the lens of evidence and facts and precedent and parliament. For these people, it's like you're asking them to fall out of love with somebody. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Simon Clarke, Andrea Jenkins, Nadine Dorries will never withdraw their support from Boris Johnson. And I'll use them as the totems, if you like, the exemplars. Of the other 225 Conservative MPs, I suspect a significant number will be in the same category to varying degrees. But it's not just about, oh, this is so awful, I can't possibly abstain, or this is so awful, I can't possibly vote for it. This is about, my God, he's all the things I swore he wasn't. I can never admit that. Somewhere deep inside, they've all got, good God, he's absolutely awful. He's all because they must be the same as Trump. He's lied and lied and lied again, and I've defended him, and I've lost friends, but they can't go there. They can't go there because he sustains them in a way. But it's not about, there comes a point where it stops being about the charisma of the corrupt politician, and instead it's about the character of the cultist. And the character can't abandon the cult leader. You can't. There's a sort of weakness there, a frailty. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Simon Clarke, Andrea Jenkins, Nadine Dorries. Just look at them, watch them. And it's beyond politics, and it's into the cult of the personality. And to surrender their support for the cult leader is to lose a huge part of who they are. Just look into stuff about Scientologists and other religions. Look into it. And you can't. You take that away from people and they're lost. It's 11:47. What do you think I get accused of most? No, not that. Don't be ridiculous. That's just rude. Overthinking things. Is it possible they're all just a bit thick? That's a question for you. How many of them were there again? 225. Is it possible there are 225 Conservative MPs? They're all just a bit thick. They can't all be a bit thick. Speaking of a bit thick, can you clip up that Lee Anderson thing that I just sent you for the tape? They could all just be a bit thick. So you got your cultists and then you got your thickos. Which one is Leonici? Do you want to hear this? This is the speech that you have voted for in your droves to have a little taste of. What do we say? Cultist or just stupid? Or both or neither?
I had to speak in the House today because I cannot see where the evidence is where Boris Johnson misled Parliament knowingly, intentionally.
She's holding the report in her hand. That's why everybody's laughing.
And I have to say it as I see it.
Order. It is important to listen to the Honourable Lady. Leonici.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say it as I see it, because that's what my constituents would want me to do. Yes, I have read it, and I think that is quite an appalling question to ask a member in this House. The reality is that Boris Johnson did not, knowingly or intentionally, mislead this House. The reason, if people would like to listen, that I say that is that last year for 6 months I was one of Boris Johnson's parliamentary private secretaries. And I was the only member of Parliament who was with him for the whole day on the publication of the Sue Gray report. When he read that...
Very grateful for the Honourable Lady giving way. She says, having read the report, that she sees no evidence of Boris Johnson's wrongdoing. Does she agree with me that there is none so blind as those who will not see?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his comments, but for those people who haven't got anything more interesting to do than actually spend their time reading the whole of the report, of which I did, I am aiming this at members of the public, is that I suggest people go to pages 85 to 88 and actually read the quotes. The reality is that there were some people who had parties. Sadly, those people were unelected officials who still should have stood by making sure that they weren't having ministers potentially in difficult situations by advising them incorrectly.
That is, well, I just thought you'd want to hear it yourself, because this 2-hour programme now dedicated to trying to work out what these people are up to completely overlook the fact that they're all just stupid, absolutely thick as mince, or perhaps capable of reading something without understanding any of it. My goodness me. Marty's in Belfast. Marty, can you remember why you rang in?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
how are you
Marty.
doing?
I'm grand. What's on your mind?
You say they're thick as mince. We have a saying in Belfast, they're thick as champ. You're
It's the
dead
same
right.
thing, isn't it?
Absolutely, but champ is a little bit thicker. It's more stodgy.
Fair enough. Go on.
But regarding Rishi Sunak, yes. He's being hypocritical, in my humble view, because he said, I think it was yesterday, he fully respects the work that the committee did. He fully respects what is in the report, but yet he didn't go and vote to put his rubber stamp on respecting what was in the report. But that's not particularly why I called in.
No, but that's a really good point, actually. He has tried to have his cake and eat it, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. He has. But I'm very curious to see whether in the near future Rishi Sunak will kick Boris Johnson out of the Tory party. Johnson has had what is left of any integrity that might have been there officially ripped to shreds by his peers in the House of Commons. And by a factor of, get this, James, almost 52-1. He has officially trashed the reputation of the Conservative Party. And I think that...
Yeah, but that's all very well you saying that and me agreeing with you. If a significant swathe of the Conservative Party hasn't noticed or doesn't understand that or disagrees, it doesn't count, it doesn't exist.
Actually, I don't think a large swathe of them do disagree.
No.
I think a lot of them have decided not to vote for protecting themselves against the worst of what might happen from their local constituency members or their membership. But Rishi Sunak made the statement of bringing integrity and professionalism back to government. And if he did kick Johnson out of the party, it would give a little bit of substance to that.
It's too late now, Marty. He could have done that yesterday. He could have whipped the MPs to vote for the report. And I think that... I mean, that is the great unknowable, isn't it? Is how much support would he hemorrhage if he actually went after Johnson like a rat up a drainpipe? I personally would, if I was counselling him, I'd say, what have you got to lose? You know, you're 20 points behind in the polls. These by-elections are probably going to be difficult for you. I don't know for sure, but the calculation it has been in Downing Street. You're going to lose less by looking like a massive coward than you are by actually supporting Parliament and supporting the Select Committee. And that is an insane position for him to be in, to have ended up in.
Well, see, I think he made a mistake by releasing the Johnson's honour list before the report came out.
Yeah.
And I think he might have learned by that and has waited to see of those that went into Parliament, what the numbers looked like voting for
that's very true.
The report.
Yeah.
Now that it's out, I think he may... Well, I'm hoping... I think one of your callers earlier on called them minerals.
Yes.
Over here we have a rhyming slang word for it called Derry's Walls.
Derry's Walls. He needs to find some Derry's Walls.
He needs to find some Derry's Walls.
But what if he doesn't have any?
No, well then, is he a woman?
No, I didn't mean it like that. You know what I meant. It was like talking earlier about not realising that he's a leader. It's a metaphorical term for cojones, isn't it? It's what if he doesn't actually have any? What if he doesn't have any? Backbone is probably a slightly less controversial, albeit still biological term to use. Thank you, Marty. Last word on this to Ian in Broxbourne. What's it going to be, Ian? I like this. Does Ian know he's on the radio? Ian.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello. What's on your mind?
Hello, James.
Hello, Ian.
Hi there. Sorry about that.
That's
I think I had a bit of a broken up line there.
That's all right, mate. You're here now. That's the main thing. You're very welcome.
Well, thanks for taking my call. I was having a bit of a think about this question. It's such a good one. What is it?
What's he up to?
What is it? But more importantly, what's he scared of?
Yes, exactly.
What's his fear?
Exactly. Yes.
And that is such a good question. And I'm wondering if, going back a couple of calls ago, you mentioned that figure of 225.
225. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't turn up.
So we're still talking about a party that's got a pretty big problem, a schism, a division.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the reason he didn't turn up and vote is if he voted for it, that schism is really going to grow.
Is it though?
Exponentially.
Is it though?
Well, it may not.
That must be his calculation.
Yeah.
It must be.
But exactly, yeah. I think it probably wouldn't. But what's he scared of? I think he's scared it might. And he may, again, this is purely supposition.
Everything.
Have to think, right, I've got to call a general election. which undoubtedly...
Well, you mean
he'd lose.
you're getting into vote of no confidence territory with a majority of need. I don't see it. I mean, because there's none. No, there aren't any lightning rods, Ian. There's nobody there because Johnson's gone. Remember,
No, I suppose
who
so.
would be?
Yeah.
Who would? What is the maypole around which they would dance? The biggest maypoles are the ones more moderate than Sunak and less enthralled.
That's
So
true.
I don't think that there are any kind of Johnsonish maypoles out there.
Yeah.
I don't know who it would be.
I don't, well, exactly. I don't know what it would be. I'm just trying to get inside his head. What's that motivation? He must be scared of something. And I just think he may be scared of...
everything.
Everything.
What if he's scared of everything? No, I mean it. He's scared of everything. What do you do if you're scared of everything, Ian?
Yeah.
You don't move.
Well...
You don't move. You do nothing.
Well, yeah, I'm
That's
based
it.
on that.
That's it. We've got it. What time? Look
We've
at
got
that.
it.
12 noon on the flipping button. He's scared of everything.
I think he is. That's why he gave that statement yesterday morning. You know, ITV News was interviewing. It was almost like this mechanoid.
Yeah.
He's almost. I think he's paralysed.
Let's play it once more. I know we're going to be late for the news, but I think we've come full circle. I think Ian's blooming gone and done it. That's it. Here he is. This is yesterday. This is a man who he's not scared of X or scared of Y. He's scared of everything. He's scared of everything.
Well, this committee was established under the former Prime Minister. It commanded the confidence of the House at the time, and I'm sure that they've done their work thoroughly, and I respect them for that. Obviously, this is a matter for the House, not for the government, and that's why each and individual colleagues will make up their own mind when the time comes.
So are you not going to be there?
I said each and individual colleague will make up their own mind when the time comes. This is a matter for the House rather than for the government. It's an important distinction, and that's why I wouldn't want to influence anyone in advance of that vote.
But you promised professionalism, accountability, integrity at every level. Boris Johnson has undermined all of those. Do you not need to set an example and vote for him to be punished for that?
As I said, this is a matter for the House. It's not a government matter.
And it's 4 minutes after 12. We change pace completely now and indeed change direction. Couple of stories around that speak to something I've been wondering about for a while. Elton John is at the heart of one of them, and the Mayor of Keighley is at the heart of the other, one emerging, I think, with credit and one emerging with the polar opposite. I don't want this conversation to be particularly focused on Philip Schofield, all right, for reasons that I will now explain. So Elton John has offered his view of the Philip Schofield scandal, and he has opined that it was totally homophobic. He says the Philip Schofield thing has been totally homophobic. If it was a straight guy in a fling with a young woman, it wouldn't even make the papers. And that is part of an interview he's given to the Radio Times. The Radio Times has a very long and proud history of getting astonishing interviews with people and getting them to say things they don't say in other contexts. I think it's because they probably relax more and they get a little bit more time with them. I'd love to interview Elton John. I think he's magnificent. It'd be quite a nice follow-up to the Full Disclosure with Dexter Fletcher, wouldn't it? The director of Rocket Man, which is available. It's this week's episode of Full Disclosure. It's one of my favourites, I think, of all time. I love the guy, and it's a really lovely interview. But I digress. Looking at the interview that he's given to the Radio Times, he expresses concern that homophobia is on the rise, and he cites the Philip Schofield story as evidence. I mean, I am interested in whether that's true or not, but as I say, I don't want the focus of the conversation we're about to have to be unduly on that. If it had been a young woman, and I know all the details about how they first met and how the lad went to work at This Morning, and then the subsequent relationship that developed, and of course the lies that Schofield told to his employers essentially were the reasons behind his resignation. The relationship he described, of course, as unwise but not illegal, which is accurate, albeit that it was with a colleague he first met when the latter was 15. The affair began some 5 years later. So we know all of that. I think there might be something in what Elton is saying, don't you? That if it had been a man and a young woman in the workplace. One of the strangest things about these kind of stories, issues, is, and I'd never really come across this before I started in this job, is when a man strays, when a married man strays, or an older man strays, women are quite quick to blame the woman. The woman is quite often portrayed as a temptress, and the man somehow couldn't help himself. I don't know if you've ever picked up on this. It's something that really surprised me. I don't know whether I grew up in living a sheltered life or something like that. But I remember when we first started doing stuff on the show that was looking at relationships or sort of gossipy stuff, that I remember being very surprised by how quickly women in particular, well, female callers, I don't want to generalise unduly, female callers would be very quick to defend men. It was almost as if they couldn't. You get it with Boris Johnson. You know, the men can't help themselves, and the women are temptresses. When it's a gay man and a much younger lover, you never get that. The portrayal is always that the older man in that context must have been behaving inappropriately or unwisely or exploitatively. And I don't know whether that's homophobic or not, but it's certainly unequal, isn't it? Do you recognise what I'm saying? You must do. You look at that story. Nobody sought to portray the young man as a temptress and Philip Schofield as someone who couldn't help himself. Whereas when a man, let's say a famously sexually incontinent man like Boris Johnson, for example, the idea that he should control himself, that he has that never really seems to enter into the conversation, unless you're listening to particularly pompous and moralistic radio presenters like that bloke on mid-mornings on LBC. The rest of the time, it's quite often the woman who gets the blame. I just mentioned that because I was trying to think about where Elton John would be drawing this accusation from. The idea, as he said, the Philip Schofield thing has been totally homophobic. If it was a straight guy in a fling with a young woman, it wouldn't even make the papers. Well, it would, because Schofield was married, of course, when the relationship began. But on we go. He's talking about America. He said it's all going pear-shaped in America. There's violence, discriminatory laws enacted in Florida, which are disgraceful. If you visit a doctor in Florida, they can refuse to treat you if you're gay, which I find just unbelievable. We seem to be going backwards, and that spreads. It's like a virus that the LGBTQ plus movement is suffering. I want to know whether or not you think that's true. And I suppose it would be hard to answer that question if you're not gay. Certainly in the first instance, the idea that the rather successful fight against this particular bigotry is now in retreat, that the battle against homophobia is in retreat. He says it's a growing swell of anger and homophobia that's around America. And Elton John's fear is that it would be, like most things are, quickly imported into the UK. In fact, he suggests that it is already spreading in the UK, and he uses the Philip Schofield story as an example. 10 minutes after 12 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So is this true, do you think? Is there what would you call it? An increase in homophobia. Are you picking up on it? I generally don't do big transgender conversations on this programme because they end up upsetting everybody. I have my own position. I've expounded it frequently, both in print and on air. I think that many women who express a fear of their so-called safe spaces, and I mean so-called literally, I'm not saying so-called in a sarky way, safe spaces being accessed by people who were born male. I think a lot of them are in very, very good faith. I think a lot of their concerns are sincere. And equally, I think it's impossible to police that. I don't know what you do. You introduce underpants inspectors or something like that. So I find the conversation very odd in many ways and unhelpful, and I haven't yet found a way to be helpful. I haven't yet found a way to move the conversation towards resolution. But I will say this, you can see quite clearly a lot of people who either are or would be homophobic getting very, very, very heavily involved in the transgender conversation. You can actually pick up on it sometimes. There's a relish with which you can hear people asking politicians whether a woman can have a penis, for example. There's a relish to it, a really ugly tabloid relish that if you went back to the days of the Sun 20 or 30 years ago, these are the same people who were writing stories about you being able to catch HIV from a toilet seat or whatever it may be. The homophobia in the Sun under Kelvin Mackenzie was off the flipping charts. It was absolutely breathtaking. And that particular strand of toxicity still exists, of course, but it has been successfully quashed. And I think some people, some unsavoury characters, see the transgender conversation as a way to sort of just creep back into that kind of territory, albeit that the targets of the bigotry and the hatred are transgender people rather than gay people. So that is, I think, Elton John's thesis. I think he is looking at the LGBTQ plus movement in its entirety. But once you take one element of that equation and essentially portray them as deserving abuse or being open to abuse, then I suspect that the protection of the other elements of that panoply, that rainbow, the other elements of that rainbow feel less safe. But I haven't got a clue from a personal perspective. I will rely entirely on you for insights on this. Elton John suggests that Britain's fairly successful battle against homophobia is in retreat, that homophobia in the UK is on the rise. He suggests also that the Philip Schofield story was totally homophobic. If it was a straight guy in a fling with a young woman, it wouldn't even make the papers. I'm much more interested in the bigger picture than the second bit, much more interested in the question of whether you've picked up on a shift. That's all. And obviously, I don't think you ring me to say no to questions like this, but I'd love you to find a way to do so imaginatively, because I don't just want everyone to ring in and say yes. Have you detected a shift in attitudes to your homosexuality in this country in the last couple of years? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Have you detected a shift in attitudes to homosexuality, whether or not they've been sort of smuggled in under the concerns about transgender banner? You as a gay person do feel that the picture is changing slightly. And you can, on this occasion, just ring in and say no, because I think it would be ridiculous not to let you do that. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 12:15, 0345 6060 973. I just don't know. I watch these stories, not as closely as I should with this, for the reasons that I've just explained, that the transgender conversations are so sad and angry that the temptation to look away must be resisted, but equally it is hard to resist sometimes. So I don't know as much as perhaps I should know about this. And we're not looking at that specific element of the LGBTQ plus movement. We're looking at the question of whether or not Elton John, who, was so beset by homophobia as a younger man that he married a woman in order to try and keep his sexuality secret. They went after him, I think, with more alacrity than any other gay man back in the days of tabloid horror shows. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 12:15. 18 minutes after 12, Elton John, supremely qualified to comment on all manner of subjects, but not least the public treatment of homosexuality and indeed the media treatment of homosexuality. He thinks it's getting worse. Do you? Dave's in Warwick. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hello, good afternoon, James. Yeah, as a gay man, first of all, I would like to say that I agree with Elton John's comments. Okay. I'm not necessarily a particular fan of Philip Schofield, but I think that the treatment of him really reflects what's been going on in terms of the attitudes towards the LGBT community, not just in this country, but obviously what we're seeing in the US as well. If, as Elton John said, if this was like a sort of a Leonardo DiCaprio, or I think it was actually Schofield that said that, if this was a Leonardo DiCaprio with sort of a 21-year-old girl, it would never have been front page on the newspapers for basically 3 weeks. And there would never have been the public response by certain newspapers, which was clearly homophobic. But what we're also seeing in this country, because of perhaps, we've seen the politicisation of the trans issue by people like Suella Braverman. Yes. Johnson, as we know, was pretty much an unapologetic homophobe. I think Sunak is as well. His comments regarding the trans community.
Just for people who don't know, because that was quite a leap. You're talking about the tank-topped bum boys comment and stuff like that from back in the day.
That's right.
Yes.
But I mean, we've seen it historically, of course, via the media. I mean, you get people like Piers Morgan sort of apologising for the article he wrote in for the Sun newspaper about the Colin and Barry kissing EastEnders, which was a vicious article.
I'm not across any of this, but then I wouldn't be, would I? Because it's your life that you're discussing here, or at least your identity.
Without doubt. I mean, he wrote a really vicious article for the Sun newspaper.
But he apologised. A lot of them haven't apologised from that era.
He did apologise, and he did the apology of, these were different times.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it does miss out on how many gay men were attacked in the street because of that article. How many gay men considered suicide because of articles like that? And he may have apologised, but on a literally daily basis, he attacks the trans community. And it gets him readership. And we're seeing it also, sadly.
I thought he just attacked Meghan Markle. Does he do the? I don't know.
Right.
I mean, as with the massive majority of the country, I'm not really aware of what he's up to these days. But you clearly are, and I'm not going to dispute what you're saying. But I would nudge you, if I could, towards what's happening now, as a, because you talked about this story, the Schofield story, reflecting what's happening now. So what is happening now in terms of homophobia?
There's been, I think, something like 55-60% increase in violent attacks on gay men within the last 2 years. There's been increased amounts of sort of homophobia within the press. We're seeing, obviously, across the pond in the US, laws now being changed. You know, DeSantis, of course, in Florida, with the whole war against Disney because of the whole "don't say gay" situation. Trans people across the US are being absolutely vilified. They're not allowed to take part in sporting activities.
No, I know, but that is a different. So I think what we're dancing around is the idea, and I will loosely describe it as transphobia. Transphobe. But no, I can't do that because I think some of the concerns that women express are sincere, whether I agree with them or not. I think they're sincere. They're not born of bigotry.
I hear you.
So let's just say, you know, concerns about transgender, they've unscrewed something that we had tightened down. The other stuff then seeps out. So perhaps I'm contributing to the problem now by being a bit mealy-mouthed and by saying I think some of these concerns are sincere. And I do, but simply by saying that, you're saying to some people, no, it's okay to go after minorities.
I think.
So if I was a massive homophobe, I'd love the transgender debate, wouldn't I? Because I'm going to be able to go after the gays. That's what I'm thinking.
I think it's. I mean, you're obviously you're not. You know.
How do you know?
Well, I think I've listened to your show long enough to know what you said. But I think you've also seen members of the Conservative Party, lower level members perhaps, who are LGBT that have left the party over the last few years and publicly have done so, saying that they've never felt so unsafe being part of a party which is putting forward, you know, policies or belief systems which are unravelling the good work that has been done. Not every Tory is a homophobe.
No, far from it.
In the same way that not every Labour person is, you know, a super friend of the...
No, absolutely not.
But from a personal point of view, when I see the increased numbers of attacks, there was...
Well, if those numbers are right, then you can't... There's no debate, is there? I mean, that is...
And that has been considered to be quite a low number, that it is actually more than that. And I think that, like a lot of things, if people feel... There's always going to be bigots, and of course it's fear of the other again. It's fear of people being seen as different, and also a lot of the time it may be something they're scared of within themselves. Who knows? But they're also empowered, I think, when they see people in the media and people in power speaking out and getting away with so much in terms of homophobia. But there's a lot of gay people now, and women as well. The attack on the two lesbians on the bus in London a couple of years ago. What's worrying me is that these people are becoming more vocal and are feeling more empowered. In Birmingham, my home city was Birmingham, and there's been a number of attacks on the LGBT centre, including recently at night, trying to smash the windows down, vile graffiti on the outside.
Right.
And there's been concerns that the police have not been doing enough.
And it's going to be impossible to separate, isn't it? And that is, I think, part of Elton John's point. So I don't know quite what the word I'm looking for is with regard to transgender people. The questioning of their validity or the questioning of where they should and shouldn't be allowed to go is a different conversation from base homophobia, but the line is perforated, and some people are very, very keen to exploit that perforation. And you know, you attack an LGBTQ centre in Birmingham and claim that you're doing it because you're concerned about children being allowed to identify as a gender different from the sex they were born into, but actually you probably are. It's an unlikely thing to have got desperately excited about unless you've got a personal investment in the issue, unless you come to it already with some fairly unpleasant views about gay people. Perhaps. I don't know. Thank you, Dave. Michael's in Edinburgh. Michael, what would you like to say?
Well, I think you've diagnosed it pretty well, in my opinion.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's an undercurrent of people who have always had these thoughts.
I just want to read something out from Emma quickly.
Yeah,
you're not, because you just complimented my analysis, and they are questioning it, and I think that they might be more right than you actually. You're that's me, James. You're trying to separate the trans and gay issues, and you're not getting that we as a community consider them a single issue. If you were a target, you'd understand. An attack on one queer faction is an attack on all of us. Never mind that the Venn diagram overlaps intensely. So I get that.
I actually don't disagree with that at all. That is actually one of the things I would have said.
Sorry.
I agreed with you that I think there's an undercurrent of people who have used the media hype or media coverage of the trans debate, inverted commas. I don't like referring it to that, but there is a group of people who were ready to latch onto that and use it as a scapegoat for anything. Yeah. And people mentioned the US. You look at the US and you go, okay, there's a bunch of trans-related bills coming in, but actually most of those bills just say if you wear clothing of the opposite gender, what does that even mean? Drag queens? Yes. They're not trans.
No, they've got a huge problem with drag queens, haven't they? These people.
Yeah, and that's not just the US. That happens here. Look at the protests that some of the people on these funny TV shows attend, TV stations attend, and protest against drag shows.
Do people turn up? Do they close down the shows? Do they succeed?
I don't think they close down the shows. I think if you meet drag queens, they're quite a resilient bunch who are quite happy to tell these people where to go. Yeah,
don't mess with a drag queen. It's a fairly good rule for life, I would imagine. But I tell you what, because I was about to say, but these characters are just doing it for clicks and giggles. Clicks and clout, but then of course Andrew Tate is in the news today, and not that long ago I'd have put him on there. They're just doing it for clicks and clout list. So
but look what he's done.
Yeah. So allegedly.
Allegedly, he's been charged with. Yeah. But I think my wider point I think with homophobia is that I am actually quite scared because it's back to where it was pre-gay marriage.
Okay.
I think the discussion, and I know this is very terminally online point, but the discussion's gone back to gay people, but they use the term LGBTQIA now, right, just to include everybody, are groomers. They're grooming your kids. They want to teach them how to do X, Y, and Z in schools. They want to allow them to identify as cats, which is not a thing, right? This whole thing. I
saw that was in the Telegraph today. I thought that was April Fool's Day.
Oh, it's the same. The same story happened about a year or so ago in the US
and in Australia. The Australian newspapers claimed that they'd found a child, or rather, they claimed that they'd found someone who knew someone who knew someone who identified as a cat. But of course, none of these people.
And if you go back to gay marriage debate, what was the debate? Oh, it's a slippery spiral. Next, a man will be marrying his dog.
That was Charles Moore,
the same
mate.
Thing back then.
Charles Moore said that. Boris Johnson just put him in the House of Lords.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But I think it's recycled. It's just it's a reprominent.
That's a really helpful analysis. So even if, and right or wrong, even if you see the trans conversation as different from the homosexual or the gay conversation, the abuse and the unpleasantness is conflated. You can't separate it because as Emma actually put it, you the Venn diagram overlaps intensely, but at the same time attack one faction and it's an attack on all of us.
Yeah.
They would say.
I mean, burn a pride flag in your back garden. That doesn't just mean trans people, does it?
No, you're referring to the lad off Lewis who wasn't Lewis. I saw some of that footage over the course of the weekend, and again, I worry about saying this because it's a bit like saying clicks and clout, but I think that lad needs a lot of help, and soon, and very, very soon, and that no one would wish that sort of turmoil on anybody. But yeah, you can't set fire to a pride flag and then, or try to set fire, because it didn't actually catch, did it? And then somehow claim that it's only one bit of the rainbow that you've got a problem with, but because why then, of course, seek and fail to set fire to the whole rainbow. Thank you, Michael. 12:30. I mean, just from my point of view, as an observer and commentator on issues, already 2 calls into this, I've got a feeling I haven't had for a long time. We used to take calls, but bearing in mind, I know I seem very young, but I've been doing this for 20 years nearly. And the calls that used to go like this, it's a lifestyle choice, James. And I'd say, well, when did you choose to be straight? And they go, what? I go, when did you choose to be straight? Because if Michael and Dave chose to be gay at some point in their life, presumably around about puberty, they're thinking, I could fancy boys or I could fancy girls, so I'm going to fancy boys. So they chose to be gay, right? When did you choose to be straight? You could feel their little brains pop. Oh, I didn't choose to be straight. I said, well, you must have chosen to be straight, because it's sexuality is a lifestyle choice. You choose who you fancy. No, you don't? Oh, well, there you go. So I haven't had that. How long is it since we did that? A long, long time. We had a religious fella on, I think, not long ago who was trying to go down the St. Paul route. But the actual non-religious homophobia I haven't dealt with for ages. But speaking to Dave and Michael, that just does feel like it's closer to the surface than it was 5 years ago. 12:31 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It's 25-1 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Colour Me Shocked, chapter 476. Former Chancellor George Osborne is giving evidence to the coronavirus inquiry. He has just revealed that the Office for Budget Responsibility was, during his time as Chancellor, due to look at the economic planning for a pandemic, but instead switched its resources to exploring what? Go on, have a guess. Put your hand down, Keith. Yeah, you got it. The possibility of a no-deal Brexit. So just put that one alongside all the other evidence. We're not talking about that now. I can't bear people that bring Brexit into everything. We're talking to John Nicholson, the SNP MP, who has in the last hour or two been cleared of accusations of bullying by Nadine Dorries. Well, he hasn't been cleared by Nadine Dorries. The accusations came from Nadine Dorries. The clearing has come from a Westminster Standards panel, and John Nicholson joins us now. What's been going on, John?
Well, James, it's been pretty stressful,
I'm sure.
really. Just after she quit, Nadine Dorries made a series of complaints about me bullying her, and so this has been hanging over my head for months. I mean, James, you and I know one another a wee bit. I think pretty much the worst thing that anybody could say about me is that I am a bully. No one's ever called me a bully in my whole life. And you see some of my exchanges with people on select committee and across the floor of the chamber. You know, if somebody's vulnerable, I try and be supportive. If somebody is a miscreant who's trying to avoid scrutiny, I'll give them a hard time. I'm a journalist by profession. I didn't bully Nadine Dorries. She throws the word bully round with gay abandon.
Well, Downing Street were bullying her last week.
As my mother used to say.
Of course. Downing Street were bullying her last week.
Yes, she was being bullied because she was being deprived of a seat in the House of Lords. This process, I'd always thought, complaining to the Commissioner, is, and it's a process I really support, is to help staff at the Palace of Westminster who are or feel that they've been bullied by MPs. That's a good thing. But this is unprecedented for one MP, in this case a Secretary of State, to allege that her opposite number in the opposition is bullying her. Bullying does not involve giving somebody a hard time cross-examining them. Nadine Dorries uses the word bullying when she means thwarting,
yes,
or criticising or questioning. You yourself appear in the report that's been published within the last hour because Nadine Dorries retweeted that you were an apologist for Islamic extremism.
Islamist atrocities, actually, to be precise, John.
I'm sorry, I didn't have the exact
A hate preacher, a liar, a misogynist, a UK hater, and an apologist for Islamist atrocities. I also believe he is a bully, and like you, I particularly bridle at that ludicrous accusation, who hides behind the global LBC name who condone his behaviour.
Honestly, I don't know why you didn't sue.
No, nor do I now. I need a new roof.
That would have paid for several, I imagine. I mean,
to be clear, she retweeted that. She didn't tweet it herself. And then,
I said that.
Yeah, no, you did. I just for people listening. But enough about me. Back to the panel. What was the accusation based on?
Well, there were a whole variety of different things, but obviously I had her before me at the Select Committee, and she'd made this extraordinary allegation. She said when she was Culture Secretary, with the power to privatise Channel 4, because that's what she'd said she was going to do, she said that she'd appeared in a reality TV programme and that the people that she'd appeared with were actors, not real people. Now, the researcher on the series immediately got in touch with me and said, I lived on this estate for more than a year. I knew all these people. None of them were actors. So we invited Nadine Dorries to correct the record. She refused. We invited her, I think, a total of 3 times to correct the record, and she refused. And the reason this is bad is it is as serious to lie to a Select Committee as it is to lie on the floor of the House, first. Secondly, it was an appalling thing to do. She was traducing the reputation of the people she'd lived with for political purposes. She was also traducing the reputation of Channel 4 at a time when she had Channel 4 and its fate in her hands. If you like, she was bullying Channel 4. And they very clearly, in a very detailed report, showed that everything that she said was not true. So I sent this report to the Lords Appointments Commission. And I asked the very simple question, if you lie to a Select Committee, can you then be considered for a peerage in, say, Boris Johnson's resignation honours list? And I sent that to them. I can imagine that probably upset her. And I've heard on the grapevine that she's been turned down for a peerage. I wonder if the 2 incidents are connected.
Well, she's never mentioned it.
Well, there you are.
Is there a parliamentary equivalent to wasting police time or bringing vexatious allegations forward in these sort of contexts?
If you watch Westminster, you'll know that most of Westminster is a waste of time. It's an ongoing process.
So no, there's no sanction for spurious allegations.
As far as I know, there is no such process. But I really think the procedure should be confined to members of the parliamentary estate who are making complaints about members of parliament. I really don't think, and it would have a desperately chilling effect on the ability of opposition politicians to hold the powerful to account. If every time somebody feels they've had a hard time at a Select Committee, on social media, or across the floor of the House, they say they're being bullied, because the sanctions are quite severe. You know, yes. You can be suspended, you can be fined, you can be thrown off a Select Committee. You know, it would make opposition politicians very careful about how they relate to government ministers if they think they can be charged with bullying, have their lives upended for 6 months and found guilty. So I'm very, very pleased with the result, not just in my own case, because it's a huge relief, but just
the principle.
Better politics.
Yes. And finally, of course, one element we've overlooked is the appalling disservice it does to genuine victims of bullying, whether in Parliament or anywhere else.
I completely agree. I think that is a very important point. Ms. Dorries has spent a lifetime saying that she's being bullied. You know, for example, that she alleged that her daughter was being pursued by a Daily Mirror journalist and was a teenager. Her daughter was 26 and on her payroll. You know, she uses the word bullying under a whole variety of different circumstances. And it's entirely wrong. And as you say, does a huge disservice to the many people on this estate who are fearful about members of parliament, and we just know that there is a lot of bullying goes on here, goes on at ITV, as we know now, and a whole variety of different institutions. We need to stand up for the bullies, and we should never throw around the word bully without justification.
John Nicholson, many thanks, and I'm glad that your ordeal is over, because, as you say, it's a very loaded word, and one that Dorries uses clearly in full cognizance of the sort of impacts that it can have. And just watch her if you're not fully across these matters, because, as John alluded to, like him, I've been on the receiving end of her libellous and deceitful bullying myself. And to watch someone who does that then claim to be the victim, it's a crucial part of the mindset that seems to have infected the heart of the Conservative Party and the right-wing media. It's the bogus victimhood alongside the bullying. Quite incredible, frankly. And as he says, I probably should have sued her myself. It's coming up to court, but it's tricky, Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. She has control over, when she was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, she'd be, having control over the area in which I work. But hey-ho, off she goes. It's 1:45. It is 12:47. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Did you spot the little test there for people who think they're committed listeners? That was the trail from Sheila's show from yesterday. Today, I am told she'll be moving the focus away from mortgages and onto renters and rental costs, which are, I heard some statistics this morning that if I had any hair left, it probably would have fallen out. Back to the question of whether homophobia is on the rise, something that Elton John and my callers so far all agree with, and it's hard for me to disagree. Farhan is in Walthamstow. Farhan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Yes. Well, I would like to say that almost undoubtedly homophobia, unfortunately, is on the rise. Hate crimes are on the rise. And whilst it looks as if acceptance of LGBT is sort of all around us, especially during Pride Month, where corporations have put, the rainbow flag incorporated it into their logos and things like that. Really, I would put that under the category of rainbow capitalism, and it's kind of it's great to see that kind of representation. But really, is it helping us as the LGBTQ community, or is it helping them, the corporations themselves? Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yes.
So jumping on the bandwagon and sort of, doing all that kind of acceptance work and things like that, it's bringing about sort of social acceptance. But who is being? It's bringing about social tolerance, I would say. But is that really what we need? Or
I don't know. I don't want to. Are we sure we're staying on the theme of today's conversation? We possibly are, and I'm missing something. But in the context of homophobia on the rise, does companies trying to trumpet their credentials cause homophobia to increase?
More, but
no,
it's not putting the effort in the right place.
No, maybe. But what would we point at? What would we point at as evidence of homophobia increasing?
The reports of hate crimes increasing.
Yes, exactly. But that's not going to be caused by companies trying to put the pride flag on toothpaste, is it?
It's putting the emphasis and the priorities in the wrong places.
No, I disagree, actually. And obviously, I'm a straight man, and I presume you're a gay man. But
I'm a gay Muslim, and that's the other problem.
Yes, well, then
there's only one particular demographic that's being benefited by this. What about what's hidden in the hate crimes is actually that within communities that are non-white, for example, we're seeing a much bigger rise. Look, I lived in Qatar last year, and I've lived in the UK for this year, so I can kind of compare a little bit of what's happened and what's been happening in Qatar and what's been happening over here. Now, it looks great that LGBT is kind of more socially accepted in the UK, but what about places what about Uganda? Where it's actually coming up with new laws where you can't even say you're gay without going to prison.
No,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Again, I just steer you back to Blighty, if I may, and the fact that you're a gay Muslim. Have you read the story about the mayor of Keighley? He's resigned because he went to a Pride event and then apologised for it.
Well, that just shows that acceptance of LGBT there's a problem.
Particularly in his, he would say in his community, and that would be your community as well. So Mohammed Nazam said that the Pride event had contradicted his personal religious beliefs in a Facebook group, and despite being photographed holding the flag. So he presumably would have come in for an almighty backlash from fellow Muslims.
Well, that's up in Yorkshire. Look,
Yes.
in London, we've got the mayor of London is maybe not a fully kind of traditional Muslim or anything like that.
He's pretty devout.
Well, he's been at a Pride event, and there was no backlash towards him. So maybe different parts of the country are experiencing more benefit from this than others.
Yes.
But there's still a lot of work to do. That we can't rest on our laurels.
Well, I don't think anybody is. And as you remind us, the workload is probably increasing rather than decreasing moving forward. Farhan, thank you. I'll just read you some quotes from the Mayor of Keighley, the ex-Mayor of Keighley. I attended the flag raising for the LGBTQ community. This did not conform to my religious beliefs, and hence I offered an apology to the Muslim community. All elected Muslim representatives would be in the same position. Farhan's already shot that down, hasn't he, with the comments about Sadiq Khan. And then he tries, by my apology, I did not mean any harm to the LGBTQ community. My religion teaches respect and tolerance for all and the law of the land. I mean, talk about tying yourself in knots. Sasha's in Tilbury. Sasha, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. I'm calling... full disclosure, I'm a female and I'm not a gay woman, but I have a lot of lesbian and gay female friends.
Okay.
And I'm actually quite interested in how there is a lot of homophobia. I believe there is a lot of homophobia, but I also believe there's a lot of misogyny.
Yes.
And I believe that lots of what's going on, and it's really difficult to now isolate, obviously, the LBT, so LGB with the T's. But it's interesting what's happened with organisations like Stonewall. If you look at their publications, they barely mention the word lesbian. I'm trying to get involved with the Lesbian Project, which is something that Kathleen Stock has set up with Julie Bindle. It's a fantastic, interesting organisation.
Just point me towards the increasing homophobia, if you would. What does it look like?
It just looks like more of an openness to slurs.
Like what?
You just still hear bad language about gay people, negative things, perhaps not in higher education or higher professional areas, but you do still hear homophobic slurs. You can understand why young people grow up.
You're not gay.
I'm not gay, but
nor am I, which is why we're having a conversation about how we measure the increase in homophobia, and I'm a bit confused about what you're telling me. How do you measure it?
I hear it, I see it, I research it a lot.
Okay.
I'm a social researcher previously, and looking at
So what sort of things are
research
happening now that probably wouldn't have happened 5 years ago, do you think?
Well, if you look at the funding going into...
No, I'm not looking at funding. I'm looking at
organisations.
incidents of homophobic behaviour, Sasha.
Incidents of homophobic behaviour.
It's what we've been talking about since 12 o'clock.
Of course, and I want to contribute, but I just believe that as lesbian women, they're being ignored. The misogyny makes it difficult. For lesbian
you're putting me in a very
women
tricky situation because you're not phoning in about the conversation we're having, are you?
I do believe that gay women having prejudice is homophobia.
Yeah.
If they experience it
what are we
because they're gay,
seeing?
not because they're straight.
What are we seeing that we didn't see 5?
Just that.
It's all right. Let's just call it a day. I understand your grievances, and there are plenty of opportunities to air them. But this, from the very start, was a conversation that was clearly addressing very different issues. It's a shame you did that. Lucy's in Bromley. Last word, Lucy. I'm sorry we haven't got longer. What would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So one thing I think it's important to recognise is that transphobia and homophobia are
two sides of the same coin right now.
So some people dispute that very passionately, don't they? But you're here to explain why that. No.
Spaces or anything like that. I'm talking the ones I think we can mostly agree on without touching the more live aspects.
Yeah, of course.
The far right, especially the Christian far right in America, have actively been trying to split the community, to divide and conquer. It's why right now you see a lot of transphobia is literally the same reheated homophobic arguments that we saw a decade ago.
This is when I feel
word for word.
This is when I feel most worried about my attempts to sort of rise above it or plot a course between two camps. When I do see incredibly clear echoes in conversations about the transgender issue, incredibly clear echoes of blatant homophobia. But I don't believe, Lucy, that everybody who is confused or troubled by transgender issues is a homophobe.
No, I'm not saying everyone, but I'm saying that the two are very tightly correlated. I'm talking just on the hate side of it.
If you're trying to take the T, if you're trying to split the T from the LGB, then the chances are that you bear some malice towards both camps.
Exactly. It's an active tactic that's been going. Like the Alliance Defending Freedom, quite a known right-wing Christian, they push a lot of homophobia, the Heritage Foundation. There was a meeting around 2017 where they actively tried to push this. Like a quote from this conference has been reported by the SPLC, known for keeping an eye on these sorts of things.
Yeah, but as with the last caller, you're bringing in an awful lot of stuff I can neither check nor respond to.
Okay, here you wanted some examples straight away.
Yeah.
The past few days, Lawrence Fox got quite a bit of retweets on Twitter.
We talked about that, trying to set fire to the pride flag, saying something about children being mutilated, which, I mean, is factually ridiculous, and also he failed to set fire to it. But that attempt to go in, pretend or claim that you're criticising transgender-based behaviours when the pride flag is obviously representative of everybody in the LGBTQ community.
Exactly. As the previous caller said, we're a united community. There's always going to be a few that might disagree, but as a whole, we are a united community. An attack on one is an attack on all of us. It's why the progress.
And yet there are gay people who would disagree with that. Gay women in particular, I think.
There are some, but
quite a few.
There was a group just like us who have been putting studies. The actual studies show there is very strong unity. I think they found is either 92 or 96% of lesbians are trans supportive.
I don't find that hard to believe, but I haven't got the numbers in front of me or the figures. I mean, you can tell, can't you, that there is a change in the conversation about LGBTQ+, which is prompted largely by a lot of the conversation about the T bit of it. I don't think that's even a vaguely controversial thing to say, but in the context of these sort of conversations, as I've said to you a million times in the past, everything can be construed as such. If you missed any of today's show, you can check for yourself by listening back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can rewind live radio or enjoy the whole show podcast. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcast. So rewind live radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick's back, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 It's time for Sheila Fogarty.